Hey there. I wanted to let you know about an easy way to support this show and also the network of shows that it is a part of. If you go to Duckfeed.tv/tipjar, you can use the Amazon link there to do your normal online shopping. And the cool thing is, we get a small percentage of whatever you buy, or the profit. Just like a cut of whatever. You know what I mean. It doesn't cost you anything extra. It's the same old Amazon, and that goes a long way towards helping cover hosting and the like. And that is in addition to patreon.com/DuckFeed.tv and all the other stuff. Now, let's get into an episode that will surely get us in trouble.
Some of our landings were desperate adventures. We are now prepared to meet the inevitable counterattacks with power and with confidence.
Lords, where did you happen upon this Kole? This is much too dark. I see the abyss in it. Yet a smith I remain. I won't turn down a request. But forget not, your fight is for the flame and for your fellow kin, just like mine. A cursed fate this may be, but hope remains, does it not?
My name is Gary Butterfield.
My name is Kole Ross.
My name is James Carter.
And you're listening to Bonfireside Chat. It is a Profaned favorite.
And this week we are talking, this is a twofer, we're talking about the Irithyll Dungeon and the Profaned Capital for episode 100, this auspicious occasion.
Didn't even realize that.
Yeah, I know, right?
What an honorific to go to this zone.
We made it. We're done. Yeah. This is it. Finally. And as you heard, we're joined by James Carter of the Cane and Rinse podcasting collective.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, we're nearing 5 years of podcasting at Cane and Rinse now.
Oh, that's awesome.
Closing in on episode 250, which will be on Bloodborne, fittingly.
Oh, wow.
Very cool. Yeah,
yes,
fantastic.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thanks a lot for joining us, James.
No, it's my absolute pleasure. And episode 100, what an absolute treat.
Yeah. How can you talk a little bit about? So we've had Joshua on before, and we announced last episode we were going to have Josh on this episode as well. Something has come up, so he was unable to join us. So the roundabout way of saying, that people who are listening are probably already at least a little bit familiar with Cane and Rinse, but for those who are not, can you speak a little bit to that?
Absolutely, yeah. So Cane and Rinse was set up by three fairly well-established UK podcasters after their separate shows kind of ended sort of 5 years ago now. And they sort of came together and set up a show that the premise of which will be familiar to listeners of your podcasts, actually, which is each week we take a different game, usually single game, sometimes group, several together in a series. And we take a sort of 2-hour deep dive on everything to do with that game, its development, its history, its legacy, and the game itself and what we thought of it. And we usually try and stick to games that are not out right now. They've been out for, around a year or two, many, many years more than that sometimes, just so that we can kind of get a holistic view of what the game is and not an initial reaction or, not lose out on the sort of long tail response to the game and the way it was received and etc. And that, as I say, has been going 5 years now, so closing in on 250th episode. So.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's great fun. There's I think at the moment 9 of us in the podcast team. It's floated around the 9 or 10. So each week it won't be the same people on. So we get to kind of tailor the crew to the game and really make sure that the people who are on have something to say about the game in question and hopefully have time to play some of the longer games, because I'm sure, as you guys have struggled with in the past, when it's an 80-hour RPG, it makes it tough to get people who've had to play a game for a podcast one week to then be ready to talk about something like that the next week.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a pro subscribe, I think, and it's the quality is amazing, but also you guys don't just cover the the obvious things like I listened to the sensible World of Soccer episodes.
That was a really, really good. We have had lots of good feedback about that because it's a game that I think for people in the UK and possibly in Europe specifically, where soccer, football for us is kind of a really big deal. That's a game that there's a lot of nostalgia attached to, but then you get people who aren't so familiar with that game or the sport, and to hear very enthusiastic, almost fetishization of a game like that they may not be aware of at all. It's a bit like listening to people talk about vinyl music records and stuff. There's kind of that. It's just, I hope, and I think it is interesting to listen to and intriguing to hear about, even if it's something you've never heard about before, a game you've never heard about before.
Oh, it certainly is, and I'm definitely in the latter camp. But like just the fact that you guys kind of zig and zag, and it's kind of unpredictable what you're going to do. You guys, whoever is in charge of programming that gets a huge variety in there, and it's always interesting. Yeah,
Leon, Tony, and Jay, the three founders, do an absolutely stellar job of keeping the rest of us at the top of our game, I think. So
nice.
Yeah. It's really neat, because the one thing that I like about what we've kind of done with podcasting here, where so we do Bonfireside Chat, and then other shows have kind of come up that do similar things. Yes. So you have your Twin Humanities and your Don't Give Up Skeletons and stuff, but nobody covers things from the same perspective. And I like that there is Kane and Rince because so we do Watch Out for Fireballs, and they're really similar premises, but they feel really, really different in a way that I've never felt. Somebody asked me on Twitter when I think it might have been the first time I heard about it, and they could have been joking, but they're like, "Hey, these dudes are biting your steez," and I've never felt. I was just like, "Oh no, this is great."
Yeah,
this is really, really cool, and of course the world can support something like that. There are literally hundreds of thousands of games that are worth talking about. Probably. I mean, if you go deep enough, you get maybe not hundreds of thousands. That's an exaggeration, but there are plenty. There are enough to where I'll die before I get to talk about every game I want to talk about.
Yeah, so
it's a big enough pool. So I am way into the fact that there is this kind of other approach, and it's also very novel to me just that it is somebody from another country doing the same thing.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I kind of like it.
It means that obviously there are different games that would have been big in our particular country and not in others, but also it's different take on the same games that maybe are, from Japan or something like that, so it's external to both of our sensibilities, and we just have completely different takes on it because of our different circumstances and culture, etc. So, and cultural response to it. Yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting one because the first I heard of you guys was this show, but obviously you were already well established by then, and the notion of looking at older games and talking about those and focusing on one game per episode rather than the what have you been playing weekly kind of magazine show, I guess, that a lot of other people do. Is not particular to video games by any stretch of the imagination. There are film podcasts and have been similar, magazine articles and TV shows and websites and all sorts, following that kind of premise. But yeah, I think you're right. Even just on Souls podcasts, the flavor of each of them is so wildly different that something that sounds like it should be treading on the toes of someone else or copying someone else or however you want to put that, actually there's space for a unique and individual take on it or a different voice to be there.
I for sure think so. How did you get into the Souls games specifically?
So because of the staggered release date of Demon Souls, a podcast I was listening to back in 2009-2010 called Big Red Potion, which is no longer around now, but at the time, and still is one of my all-time favorite podcasts. They managed to wangle a situation where Demon Souls won their Game of the Year 2 years in a row. because the US and Japanese releases were 2009, but the European wasn't until 2010. So that's a pretty strong indication that maybe there's something there. So January 2010, I picked up Demon's Souls, which was, beg your pardon, January 2011, because it would have been after it got Game of the Year 2010 on that podcast. And it's a game I'd heard about on podcasts, and it kind of had that Marmite effect amongst sort of mainstream video game media, where
that's
some
a
people
really
were saying,
good way to put it.
Yeah, some people were saying it's just hard for the sake of hard, and it's badly designed. And I remember at the time, Arthur Geese was quite a big critic of the controls and the way it played, versus something like Ninja Gaiden that he's a big fan of. And those games are obviously chalk and cheese. They're not trying to do the same thing by any stretch, but it meant that it wasn't all positivity around Demon's Souls to me, but the people who were positive were incredibly positive, enough that, as I say, I picked up what was over here the Black Phantom edition, which was kind of the special edition version of the game with the sort of guide and the red sort of red cover art and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's looks real cool.
Yeah, that we had, because we had different publisher, and that was Namco publishing that in Europe, whereas it was Atlas in the US and Sony obviously in Japan. So, I think that's right. So yeah, we had obviously I was a bit later coming to that, partly because of when it came out in Europe and just when I got to it. Yeah. And I ended up for a couple of years pretty much kind of picking my way through Demon's Souls. I started Dark Souls the day it came out, but I kind of wanted to stick to Demon's Souls and play them in order. And it was a real kind of slow burn. I loved Demon's Souls, but I never really played more than an hour at a time before I thought, no, I need to step back and calm down, and came back 2 weeks later. Far from the ideal way to play it, but it got its hooks into me almost one at a time over a year or so. And then by the time I got to Dark Souls, I was just all in on the series. And finished that in 2013 in time to host the Dark Souls episode of Kane and Rince. And it's kind of destroyed my video gaming for a couple of years there, 2013, 2014, and probably last year as well. It just became a default was, I'm not feeling this game, I'm just going to go and play some Dark Souls, or Dark Souls 2 or Bloodborne, you know. So yeah, I played the series in order and became just a ridiculous fan of the games. I guess it's the age-old adage of, you know, I've put hundreds and hundreds of hours into the series, and as many more reading about and listening to people talk about and watching videos about the series as well. Because it's one of those where, a bit like when you're at university or college and they say, oh, you need to do as many hours reading as you do in class. And so, yeah, I took that to heart with the Souls games as well. So, yeah, I've been a massive fan for a long, long, long time. Not right back to when it first came out, but certainly back 5-6 years at this point. So,
yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's and there's no malice in bringing you on specifically for this area or anything. It wasn't like we got a real difficult kind of unfinished area in this. Let's get James on this.
In fairness, the shitty unfinished area is only like 30% of this.
That's true.
Like,
yeah, the other part is very cool.
Yeah.
I also, and I admit I needed to find somebody who was not going to just argue with me about Secret the entire time. And I know from listening to Kane and Rince, even if you disagree with me about it, you're polite.
That's some of the best conversations are when there is a disagreement there and you can try and not even bridge that gap, but at least just try and work out why the gap exists. And
I remember that from listening to listening to the Dark Souls 2 episode.
Yeah,
where you had CJ, who is friend of the show and has been on this show, who is quite the Dark Souls 2 evangelist, and was at least a minority on that episode. But the way that that was handled was just very smooth and no hurt feelings, and it was pretty nice. It was I like how
exactly. Yeah. It ended up being we ended up with 5 people on that show, which is more than we usually have on an issue of Kane and Rince, just because it becomes difficult if you're recording individual feeds to edit them all together afterwards.
For sure.
The more feeds, it literally kind of doubles the time each extra feed you add in that you're going to spend editing it. And I ended up kind of pitching, can we have an extra person in this? Because I really want CJ to be on. We're kind of lucky at Kinrin's to have 9 or 10 people on the podcast crew, and about half of them have completed all, if not kind of most of the Souls games, which, is kind of a really nice percentage when you kind of think about the reputation these games had at the beginning, and kind of all the way through. And so we had a full crew, even without a guest, but I wanted CJ on there because I knew he was very passionate. It's not that the rest of us didn't have positive things to say, but I knew the tone was going to be less enthusiastic than the previous show on Demon Souls and the one before on Dark Souls. That we did the first two kind of out of order. And I knew I wanted that voice that would speak to the passion that maybe some of the rest of us didn't feel. And it worked wonders. I mean, anyone listening to this has heard CJ and knows how wonderful a gent he is. And he just did a fantastic job of explaining why a game that, there are things about it that even CJ admits weren't great for him, but still just had such a profound effect on him.
Yeah. Kole, what did we do last time?
Well, last time, we talked about PvP, but the actual previous area that we talked about. So we went below the catacombs of Karthus to find the former seat of Izalith in the smoldering lake and the demon ruins. And now we turn our attention to a different subterranean ruin and a different kind of flame.
Yes. Yeah. And a lot of the lore stuff we're going to talk about for this specifically applies to the Profaned capital. The Irithyll dungeon, there's ties to think that this is actually part of the capital and not part of Irithyll. So we're not entirely sure, but there's less about the dungeon. There's still some things about the dungeon. There's more about the capital.
Yeah, the dungeon is the incredibly interesting vestibule.
Yes, yeah, exactly. This is the waiting room. The waiting room where you can't sit down because there's a face already sitting there in any given seat. So this is the Profaned capital. We know it was once ruled over by conquering insurgents, which we are led to believe were giants of one kind or another because of the boss of this area, who is a giant. The city was populated by these flame-worshipping kind of mystics. There's a really strong sorcery element, and eventually came to be led by the descendant of the conquerors, Yorm the giant. Even though he was kind of made fun of and teased and not totally accepted.
The reverence for him as a ruler was kind of insincere.
You're a lord. like what a weird, that whole thing where it's like they were calling him a lord in jest. Like, you're
classic,
a real lord, Cinder.
Classic tabloid journalism. the people literally asked him to be the lord. They literally asked him to take rule. And then they just decided to tear him down. It's unbelievable.
Shameless.
Yeah.
Yes, my liege. And this is where the story gets a little bit foggy because so many of the item descriptions on their face contradict each other. In a way that I can't quite reconcile, but this is the version of this that I put together. So these mystics, they unleashed this primal force called the Profaned flame, or at least by their worship of this flame, they allowed it to happen. Something, a flame that has been corrupted by the abyss. And so Yorm, their leader, became a Lord of Cinder while trying to stop its corrupting influence, right? He linked the fire in order to kind of save his city. But in the process, it kind of went critical and rained fire from the sky of the capital, a kind of fire that would only set flame to human flesh.
Yes. Yeah, the best kind of fire. There's also, so this is when we say it gets foggy, there's two item descriptions. There's one that says that Yorm became a Lord of Cinder in order to put out the flame. One of which says that the flame went crazy when he became a Lord of Cinder. So there's two contradictory things that say, so the timeline is really difficult. And then there's one other item that mentions these mystics.
Right.
So that's just literally comes out of nowhere. With one kind of obscure item that says no, it was actually caused by these people. So the answer is we don't know. We don't actually know what happened here other than the fact that there was a cataclysm. The more you try to focus in on it, the more swimmy it gets. It's a little bit like an optical illusion kind of thing. We do know a little bit how this ties to Irithyll, though. So at some point and this was long ago, so that also kind of convolutes the timeline because we know all of this stuff happened way in the past, even for Dark Souls 3 standards, because this happened when Sullivan was a young priest,
right?
Way before he has crowned himself pontiff. He stumbled upon the Profaned Capital and harnessed the power of the flame for himself, setting him on the course to build, kind of build up Irithyll and set these events that we saw in motion. And we see his witches and his agents use the Profaned Flame in their wands and stuff. That's the first mention we get of this.
Yeah.
So the dungeon, this Irithyll dungeon, is kind of strange because the people who are there are descendants from the Profaned Capital.
Yeah, they're like refugees.
They're not Irithyllians.
Right, the refugees that were taken in by Sullivan and taken into his service.
Yeah, so I don't know if this is something that Sullivan did or if he just kind of like named it. There's no Irithyll ties in Irithyll dungeon,
right?
Really, other than that flame, which kind of ties one way back,
right?
So I always kind of thought of the dungeon as probably being part of the capital beforehand and just geographically kind of weird.
Yeah,
with it.
The biggest tie to elsewhere is the fact that inside the dungeon, as you go deeper, there are kind of these elements that I could see being interpreted as kind of dangerous to the rule of Sullivan. Such as Carla, or kind of like some these people who've been imprisoned. You see the lycanthrope down in the dungeon, or see also any of these kind of like abominations that are down here.
And I guess technically the entrance to the Archdragon Peak is there as well. So they've isolated that so that you can't come out of there without having to come through the dungeon. But also in the dungeon, the prisoners aren't necessarily from the Profaned Capital because they're just either kind of regular peasant hollows, or there's what are they called, the corpse.
Yeah, the reanimated corpses like you find in the graveyard outside of the Cathedral of the Deep.
Exactly. That have the kind of maggots on them.
Yeah.
And also when you get kind of further down beyond that into the part of the Profaned Capital that is a church, because you've got a manor, then a dungeon, then a church, then a Profaned Capital. It's really weirdly laid out, but you've got some creatures in there that are from Irithyll as well. So there's kind of some beings came up from the Profaned Capital and some were sent down from Irithyll to be kept there,
to be interred,
like Carla, presumably. But yeah, it's really weird.
Yeah, there's a reason to believe that the Profaned Capital has always been below the valley, because the description of I believe it is Sullivan's greatsword talks about him finding this ever burning flame below the Boreal Valley.
Oh yeah, but I mean that would have been
building Irithyll on top of it in theory.
And that would have been after the collapse, though, as well, when he found the flame. Because if he found the flame when it was still active, then this would have been a story about a war or something like that, as opposed to. So I assume that So the reason I ended up watching, and something I recommend for everybody, the reason why the detail that makes me think that this was an Irithyll dungeon rather than that is. Show alum and friend of the show, Richard Pilbeam, has done like a collaboration series of YouTube where it's just him going through the areas and kind of asking questions, but he brings that attention to visual detail that he does with his Bloodborne stuff.
Yeah.
On there, I really recommend these if anyone hasn't seen them. But a lot of the dead prisoners that are in the Irithyll dungeon have like coins on them.
Right.
And we know this kind of one thing we know about the Profaned Capital is it was incredibly like wealthy.
Right.
It is, and literally like down to you finding rusted coins, all that just out in the world. And then, which is the worst reward, and is not worth fighting a mimic for. But you find all that stuff down there. So that's why he thought that. There's also all of the statues in it are kind of pointing skyward.
Right.
In a way that like it would not make sense for them to be pointing towards the roof of a cave, like looking up and look at that nothing, void. Like it would make sense for there to be something in the sky. We also know that the Profaned Flame rained down from the sky.
Yeah.
So at some point it was not underground.
Right.
So there was sky at some point, but again, that chronology is makes no sense. And like Carla being locked up there, we know so little about Carla other than that she's abyss associated, and this whole area has a lot of Abyss associations as well.
Yeah,
but
I mean,
nothing
up to the point where
concrete.
people outright link it to Ulasil.
Yeah, that's weird to me. I don't know, especially once we have an Elysial, like, you know, more or less, like, and just because, you know, something being Abyss associated, there's several like areas that are Abyss associated in here. Yeah. I've also heard it read that this was, you know, the Chaos Flame just kind of mutated too, and there's no connection other than that's a flame. And a lot of people believe this was Karthus, and there's no connection other than the fact that Wolnir was a conqueror and Yorm was a conqueror. You know, there's just a lot of like just kind of one line that does not a lattice make.
Yeah. And also redundancy too.
Yeah.
So I wonder if part of that is, so I mean, in like item descriptions that talk about the Profaned Flame and Yorn trying to link the fire in order to quell the Profaned Flame. And then does it not actually just say that fire rained from the sky? It doesn't even actually, I don't think, I might be wrong, say that it was the Profaned Flame that rained from the sky. And what you end up with is, okay, so you've got the first flame, you've got the Chaos Flame that came out of the Witch of Isless, the attempt to recreate that. You've then got the Profaned Flame, which we don't really know where it came from, except it's Abyss associated. And there are Abyss associated pyromancies as well. So, you know, with the Hex crossover in our first encounter with the Abyss. Yeah. And then you've also got this fire that rained from the sky. I can understand people wanting to kind of condense some of that down. But to get back to, you had the original first flame, which could not be recreated. It exists in and of itself. And then you have the Chaos Flame that was an attempt to recreate that went horribly wrong and spawned demons. And now suddenly you've got 2, potentially 3 other types of flame. It just... I can understand wanting to condense all that down and find the one item description or line or reason that they may have just conjured up that kind of brings that back down, pairs it back down to, you know, the 2 original flames, if you like.
It's really it's an area that really underlines that kind of frustration with this, because we also have the definition of kind of giants, or what giants are, really muddied up by this as well, by introducing like the third type of giant. We're going to see in this game that does not map onto fourth type of giant. We're going to see on this game actually, which like doesn't map onto like the giants that we know from the prequel, you know, the predecessors to this.
And not only, but also Yorm is the descendant of a conqueror, which evokes immediately the giant lord from Dark Souls 2.
Yes.
Which looks like the giant lord from Dark Souls 2, but then we're kind of told that it's not. And again, you've got giants that kind of look, you know, that kind of could be seen to be related to him up in Irithyll as well, which kind of suggests, well, did he send them from the Profaned capital to attack? Or, you know, it's got this whole Dark Souls 2 kind of giant human or giant other being war. But not really, and they're not the same giants.
Yeah.
And,
or there would just be one item description that said, like, the war that came to the Profaned capital or something like that. It's very weird for history to work that way, where there's something quite that big, or like the Dark Souls history, where there's something quite that big that doesn't even get a line.
Right.
You know, doesn't even get a name, doesn't get an allusion to it. That ends up making it feel like a lot like, again, just there's like one strand, you know? And then this area, to kind of add to that frustration, is this area has weird connections to other later areas that I can puzzle out less.
Right.
You know, like the gargoyles here that are in their descriptions and stuff, everything we know about them is they're created to protect the Profaned capital. It's not like they don't show up on the roof of the archives. Like, they're around. I get this frustration that, like, you know, this is the area that makes me want a scholar style remix of this that stops some of that.
Right.
You know, or clarifies some of it, because like it is not outside of the realm of possibility that after the Profaned capital had its thing and Sullivan dipped his toes in it, some gargoyles went up to Irithyll and then made the travel over to Lothric to I guess post up and help out, you know, because things do like help anytime in this game. But like it is just there's just nothing there for it though. Like, there's no text to support it, and it kind of drives me drives me bonkers a little bit.
Yeah, and this very story about a flame run amok was a major plot point in the first game in the series, and anything like this, it's kind of the center, right? Like, this could be an act of hubris in a story that is kind of like dotted with these acts of hubris, right? Especially regarding these lords. And just so little point is made of it, at least to kind of clarify or even define the terms so that there's not this kind of cross-contamination.
It is DLC fodder for sure. Like, maybe not Ashes of Ariandel, but whatever the second one is, like, it could deal with the Profaned Flame and kind of make that make sense. It also feels very similar to me to the Aldrich Dreaming of the Deep Sea, this game as a turning point, as opposed to a finale thing, where like this could have been things to set up this idea of this undying flame that is abyss touched. If we're at some point we are going to move into this age of the deep sea, or we're going to move into this new paradigm, that would make sense to me as well. Light and dark is one way to kind of set this paranoia or this dichotomy, and then water and flame could have been another way to set it up. And that could have been Dark Souls 4 and 5 if it was a turning point in the series rather than an ending for the series.
Right.
I think part of the issue maybe with that is if the Profaned Flame is going to be subject or a subject of one of the DLCs, and you're absolutely right, Gary. It's perfectly possible that they could kind of make this make sense, but on the other hand, could they? If there's stuff that is actually contradictory already in there, how do you write that out? Do you just have a storyline about confused historians? It's very bizarre.
History.
Yeah. Well, no, just what I see happening is almost like a Bloodborne situation where instead of tying up the loose ends, they just resolve them by providing this other
better story.
Yeah, another more resonant example of the way this stuff could have worked out. Yeah. And then just the other stuff, lives on vestigially.
And all of this is presupposing that the second DLC won't just be Artorias of the Abyss again. I'm kind of joking, but I really would not be surprised if it is not just Artorias focused, and it would suck. But it's like I just don't trust them not to go back to the Dark Souls 1 well when that is what they like doing so much. Rather than expanding on the world they've actually the new world that they've built.
It's also what we've asked for as a community as a whole.
Yeah, I guess that's true. It is very popular, It is weird. It is weird to come to this and be like, what? I didn't want a sequel to Dark Souls 1. I just wanted, I wanted a world sequel. I didn't want a direct sequel. And this is the monkey's paw version of that. Because nobody loves the painted world more than me. And I don't want to go back there. This is the finale. So Yorm, who we talked about a bunch, he's burned his kingdom. He is alone on this throne. A few people have survived. A few people have escaped up until the dungeon. However, something is wrong with Yorm. He's got the glow eye. He has abyss touched. He is not fulfilling his duty. And this is the climax to Sigurd's quest line, which is the longest quest line in this game. Or at least as long as Henri's. So we also get the finale of that.
Right.
Yes.
I think the thing of note about that NPC questline is it's as long as Henri's, and for as bizarre and delicate as Henri's is, you actually have to travel backwards through the game to complete this one. That's a really bizarre thing. At least any time I've successfully triggered it, I've had to go backwards in order to make sure that what needs to happen happens. And in Henri's quest, I don't think I had to do that. You don't necessarily have to. You can end up doing that, but you don't have to do that. So, yeah, it's very bizarre that
they've both been patched quite a bit.
Yeah, sure. But in a game that's focused more than perhaps any other in the series except Bloodborne on it being a relatively linear path driving you forward, to then ask you to go back when there's no other reason to is kind of bizarre. But,
yeah, run into that with Cirrus too, a little bit.
Oh yes, definitely. Yeah, her questline literally goes backwards through the game, doesn't it?
yeah. That always felt, whenever something like that happens, where it feels like the developers are expecting you to backtrack in an area where you never have to because of teleporting bonfires. It makes me wonder if those were designed before the decision to make teleporting bonfires were implemented.
Whether that's kind of the patch afterwards, just to kind of make the game work, is what we're just going to have to teleport.
Yeah. Who can know?
Yeah.
So let's start talking about stuff that's actually in here, because as much as I've been kind of poopy on the Profaned Capital, I really love Irithyll Dungeon itself.
Yeah.
We get here, we found this bonfire before, the Distant Manor, as it's called, and this is just kind of like a little basement to that house with the Silver Knights and the picture of Guinevere,
right,
in it, and we just kind of fight some regular Irithyll enemies. There's nothing so much to these rooms, but when you head down to this kind of cliffside to actually get into the dungeon, we actually do get in it, and that's one of the things that, for me, kind of draws the connection between Irithyll and the Irithyll dungeon a little bit in question too, is that like they're not actually connected. You actually leave and come back. Like there's a stair set there, but it's not like this is the basement of a castle in there. But we run into a character from Dark Souls 2.
Yeah, this is our old friend Alva.
Mm-hmm.
He is no longer the Wayfarer. Now he is the Seeker of the Spurned.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And he has apparently given up his quest to find the cure for Saint Soretta's sickness, and is now, according to most of the things that I've seen, or just suppositions, here to find Carla. Yeah.
Which is evocative of, I forget the particular sort of side storyline in Dark Souls 2. There is a witch that is...
It's the same one. It's implied to be the same witch.
Yeah.
Who attempted to
following someone whose love has been spurned type thing. I forget, but spurned definitely evoked that, and having Alva there as well, and the way that Carla looks in terms of her appearance. Yeah, it kind of all felt very, this is straight Dark Souls 2, right?
Yeah. Yeah. These dots were connected by actually a listener, Elodie, who wrote in with this. We're going to get to that in the when we get to Carla, and then also in the appendix here. But like that is I buy the connection, actually, just because the witch is also mentioned. Like she came in and attempted to tempt him away from the quest, but they ended up working together.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
If you want his stuff, you have to fight him here. So if you fight him, his stuff will appear later. If you want his pretty baller equipment.
Yeah, it's it looks pretty cool, and also it is lighter than like the Faram set.
Yeah, because it's had metal cutaway from it in the description.
Alva's set was one of my favorites in Dark Souls 2, actually.
Yeah,
it is really good looking.
It cuts such a cool silhouette, and I love the color.
Oh, yeah. It's really detailed as well. It looks really cool.
And then we go into Latria. The tower, like this is we actually go into the dungeon. It's kind of set up similar to Latria. It's like mini Latria. Because like I recently replayed Demon Souls, and 3-1 is so sprawling and long. Like it is one of the longest levels in, and this if you don't find the shortcut, ends up feeling very long as well, but the actual dungeon part is pretty compact.
Right. By volume, it's not very big.
Yeah. But it's still, you get a little miniature Latria experience where you have to kind of, go into one way, find a key, head back, use that key, etc. So
this is also Latria in that it's atmospheric and scary as well.
Yes.
Like sometimes you'll pick up an item from a corpse, and it will just scream this blood-curdling, neighbor-waking scream.
How... Like at first I was just like, oh, this is so silly, because it's so gamey. It's like Outlast, in the middle of this. But I came to really like it if I think of this dungeon specifically as a haunted house. Like, that is the idea behind this. This is Captain Spooky's Wild Ride.
Yeah, I'm down for it. Like I'm along for that wild ride.
The atmosphere is undeniable. I think you're spot on though. Like the first moment you step out, a hollow runs out of a cell and just pushes you down. It just feels like well, that's just set up for me to fail. And the jailers feel a bit like that as well. They very definitely evoke the Mind Flayer, is it?
Oh, specifically, the Irithyll kind of guys.
Yeah. So the jailer is the kind of principal enemy here. And they are a cross between the Mind Flayers, and then to my mind, this is an attempt from to make a more fair Winter Lantern.
I can see that.
They have kind of a similar mechanic, but it's less bullshitty.
I don't know that it is, because they double up on those mechanics, because if it looks at you, you lose health. Like in Curse style, your health starts ticking down your maximum health. and they have a cursed gas attack, and they can stun lock you with that brand really, really quickly. So it definitely gives you that sort of terror. But yeah, the haunted house thing's absolutely right, because it's kind of really cheap mechanics stacked one on top of the other to just make you feel terrified.
Yeah,
and it's unnerving the entire place. Some of the enemies in here are beyond grotesque. And it definitely ends up having this kind of haunted house feel, but really
they have
cool
an amazing sound design too. When you're just talking about them intimidating you, because that kind of chuckle that they do is just, I get it as like Pavlovian a response as I did to the bell, in the mind flayers.
Yeah. And as they, if they tackle you to the ground and brand you with their peace sign brand, kind of looks like the hunter's mark or whatever. That sound, it's really, it is lovingly animated in a way that so many of those kind of aren't. It is a lovely, a lovingly designed kind of like coup de grace against you. Like they want you to remember this.
Yeah,
the way they move as well. You can't really tell whether they've got sight of you, because that's something else that's in this game. The distance at which you'll trigger enemy response is kind of difficult to work out sometimes, and the distance they will chase you, really difficult to work out sometimes. There's a couple of spots in this area where I just ran to get away from them, and they kept coming. It's just like, and the way that they run is that kind of jerky, almost like stop frame animation style. It's really unnerving in that kind of core guttural horror film type, way.
And they're very specifically on patrol as well. They're not kind of like posted up like some of the mindless enemies that we see. Like they have routes. The thing that makes them feel a little bit so I like these things. When I first encountered them, I was like, oh, well, that's kind of bullshit, because they're just getting me down to 1/10 health. However, they only drain your maximum health when their lantern is raised. And if you can actually like manage that and kind of like break line of sight, or kind of like time your runs past them, that is actually, it's easy to avoid the most kind of deleterious effects of that.
Yeah. I mean, the reason why I feel like they are more fair than Winter Lanterns, also, like I'm kind of a mixed feeling on this mechanic in general. But I like it more because it can't kill you on its own. You can't die from having them drain your health. They can still hit you, and that'll do it. They can make it so you're one hit, one kill, but they can't just kill you by looking at you.
Sure. Yeah.
It does end up kind of just being an Estus tax, because you're likely to get triggered by it, and then you're likely to trigger it. I don't know if you will be triggered by it. That's just go to gary.tumblr.com and see if that's it is, even if you're running past, even if you're fighting them, even while you're hitting them, like stunning them does not stop the effect if they've started it. So it's going to take away your max health, which takes away your current health, which means you'll have to heal even though you didn't get hit. So there's some kind of BS to that. But I just like that they can't kill you with it. Like they don't, and their actual attack, their grab attack, their branding attack that they do is much slower and has less tracking than the Winter Lanterns grab attack. Like you can roll past that.
I've rarely, I think, once been caught by that, just because you kind of learn quickly you want to be fighting them one-on-one, which kind of adds to the frustration of it being the Estus tax you're talking about. Because if you fight them one-on-one, every time you fight them, you're going to need to use Nestus. Yes. Each one, you're going to need to use Nestus,
Yeah.
But yeah, no, there's definitely that aspect. And the other thing is, as soon as you break line of sight, there's no lingering effect. And the Winter Lanterns had that kind of that grey area of, can I get away with not addressing this?
Yeah.
Or do I actually need to kind of pop a remedy? But yeah.
Something that's that I also really appreciate for the majority of this dungeon, when these jailers are active, they're only paired with other enemies that cannot move very quickly and are just kind of area denial. In the skeleton spiders, the caged ones, which actually those are cool, because if you look, you can actually see the jailer mass inside, like they've been turning their people into those as well. Either those or these incredibly weak, kind of like Dregling level hollows that are kind of set up to ambush you. So like, this is an area that by enemy number is full of enemies that should be incredibly easy to deal with. But by the presence of these things here as kind of like debuffers, it is bringing new danger to these things that otherwise wouldn't have been an issue. And that's also a conscientious choice, because if they had paired this with, especially some of the more aggressive enemies that we see even later on in this very stage, this would have been a far sight harder. So I appreciate the deliberateness of that choice to kind of like pair these with things that would kind of, push the limit but not exceed it.
Yeah, I've always cleared out the group of the jailers that are kind of circling around the pillar at the very end of this area.
Yeah.
I always clear them out before I tackle the mimic or the lycanthrope in the locked cell, because it's not happening.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if the characters we see, the monsters we see later, the handmaidens, that are very similar to these, at some point were these, and it was just too much to fight them and gargoyles at once, and then they kind of added in this other character because they're both survivors. It just seems like that because those enemies are so non-threatening. Yeah. It is such a step down in difficulty to get down to there, which is just really kind of strange from a curve, perspective. It also should be noted real quick is that if they do hit you with their brand, there's a debuff that gets applied to this. It's not just the health thing that will raise your equip burden.
Yep.
So again, just everything about these guys playing into fear. If you get hit and you start panic rolling, they will take away your ability to panic roll. You will be too overburdened to do so or to roll quickly. So you very early on learn, like, I need to not get hit by that brand.
Yeah.
And if I do, I need to go backwards away from them, shield up. I do not need to try to do some acrobatics to get a backstab.
Right.
I need to let this wear off. Again, I like everything about these guys. It does become a thing where you can get down to 10% of your health, and then I spent a lot of time in the Irithyll dungeon just kind of standing around waiting for the effect to wear off.
Like it's a modern FPS.
Yeah,
like it's
exactly.
Halo. Like you're just going to crouch behind this.
Let my shield recharge.
Yeah.
Especially when that's happened in stages, so it didn't all get drained at once. It's happened in like 2 or 3 stages with, them coming around the corner, seeing you again, come around another corner, seeing you again. And so you'll wait for your health to start regenning, and then you'll think, okay, I'll drink an Estus, and realize it stops at halfway, and you're like, oh, come on. I just wasted this thing.
Yeah, never. I used to think popping an ember would maybe like cure it or something like that, but that's a real waste of an ember.
That's a quick way to waste an ember.
So as we mentioned, there's this ambush as soon as you go by where a guy just shoves you off the cliff
and just slide tackles you off of it.
It's not very haunted house.
It's not a deadly attack either. It's just down to the lower level.
Yeah. Like don't touch the actors. They can touch you. And we run into those cage skeletons, which we haven't seen since the Undead Settlement. Right. We talked about those things.
Which is spider things.
Yeah.
Great design. And really resistant to most damages I do. But
right, yeah. You have to be a Piercy boy, which doesn't make sense for skeletons. So we're getting into something where it's been long enough since I've seen a lot of these enemies that I kind of forgot about them. So the second one of these cages started like rattling and making that noise, like I didn't expect it. The first time it came through. We're going to run into that in a big bad way when we go back to Lothric, because like, wait a minute, this is a game about Lothric? Fuck, I haven't been here for 15 hours. But even here, as they start kind of like slowly reintroducing these, I think it's a good way to do it.
Mm-hmm. We start seeing our ties to kind of magicianship and sorcery in this area, which is a really big thing,
right?
Weirdly enough, and it's again this weird feeling of like how Big Hat and kind of the Dragon School are tied to like 3 areas in this game. It's like, the Crystal Sages, the Farron people, and then now we end up running into some Big Hat stuff, as well, and kind of general Vinheim thing, because we find the old sorcerer set like Griggs War, Griggs and the blacksmith,
Rickard,
and great magic weapons in the cell right next to, or a couple down from that old sorcerer set as well. So you definitely get that stuff here. It just doesn't it feel a bit like Big Hat Logan is just this kind of, if they're short on lore anywhere, it's a bit like putting in a pinch of herbs or spices into things. Just grab the Logan grinder and just grind some Logan on that area. Just, spice up
a little bit of Logan can cover a lot of sins. That's all people taste anyway.
I started getting grossed out, so I uninstalled Logan Grinder. I felt like it was just getting weird. All these people with their big hat puns, it was starting to gross me out.
Wait a minute, you weren't banned for being a Gary?
No, it's because I wanted to grind Logans, not because I was a Logan.
Oh, okay.
You download it when you want to find a Logan to dry hump.
Or is it like Bumble? You have to wait for the Logan to contact you.
Yeah. But yeah, it does feel like he's just kind of everywhere. Like he's Johnny Sorcery Seed.
What I love, and you really see it in the items that are kind of present here, especially in the sorcery fight we fight later, is that everybody is kind of fighting to be the true heir apparent to this master who lived millennia ago, and so it's this religion that has cropped up around this madman who he killed in his underwear.
I was going to say, yeah, our lasting memory of him is a giant hat with a naked body underneath it running around like an Egypt in a crystal cave. It's like it's not exactly... He didn't really live up to his legend in that game, did he? Let's be honest.
Nope.
I like that too, Cole. Like, it does kind of square the reason why there is some of this stuff.
Yeah.
It undermines it in a way that I don't particularly like that much, though. Like, it does make it an equation that works. Like, it's... Somebody in the plot has said, like, no, Logan's actually everywhere, and this is why.
Yeah.
But, like, Logan, yes, he was, like, an idiot in his underwear, but there was this idea of, like, there's still tragedy in his underwear story, and there's this association, this much stronger association with him studying, like, Seath and this kind of, this crystal magic thing.
Yeah.
There was a stronger through line that's just kind of become really diffuse now.
Yeah. Well, or it's become, like, commonplace. Almost
like it's become generic almost. The quest for power turning against you.
It reminds me of just kind of the general, like, some of the ways that FromSoft, for all that they kind of worship Dark Souls 1, there are some very distinct, like, not like fuck yous, but like this whole I just recorded like a top 5 NPCs thing with the Twin Humanities guys, and we were talking about Solaire because he ended up on Patty's list, and he was talking about, like, we were talking about the way that Dark Souls 3 kind of treats Solaire and how that's such a bummer. And this is one of those things too. This guy who was like this great sorcerer who, yes, had this like kind of bonkers, undignified end, but was spoken of in kind of hushed tones by everyone.
Oh yeah.
Is actually just now it's just like everywhere and everyone's got his stuff. It's like he's like the McDonald's of he's been franchised.
Well, it's Logan inflation.
Yeah. Yeah, it feels like disrespectful in a way that I'm not trying to defend a video game character like a real person, but just this, this heavy implication that Solaire has been made into soup, which I don't necessarily buy, but like that there's something there that like could be the case. There's this weird way of just being like, yeah, everyone you loved from Dark Souls 1, fuck them. But every place you love from Dark Souls 1, here it is. There's this the attitude is really hard to parse out.
Yeah.
It's kind of this weird, I think unintentional kind of critique on the cachet of celebrity almost, isn't it? That Logan and Solaire became so well known, not just in the game, although Solaire wasn't that widely renowned, but in the fan base as well, if you like, in the public mind, that just, they kind of need to be a brand, a franchise that can just be, brought out any old time.
Yeah.
It's so good. It's weird. Yeah.
It's the degradation of veneration. Like what's happening with Logan is almost like what's happened with Big Boss. With people just like fighting to like, well, I need his hand so we can use his cells to make super soldiers.
They want to appropriate different parts of both physical and ideological aspects of the character.
Yeah. It is. The more I kind of get into it, I am interested in reading and more open to the idea of Dark Souls 3 being kind of a meta story about Dark Souls fandom. And like I've read that argument before without like an essay behind it, just somebody kind of saying it. And like if anybody has a really good source for like wank it up, like the wankiest, most give me like the most like dryly academic idea of this, because I want to read it. I don't necessarily know that I'm going to go for it. But this idea that like this is from responding to their success makes more things make sense to me as I get further into the season.
It's strange that you bring that up because that is very much what Kojima did with Metal Gear Solid 4. He just didn't want to make it, and so that entire game is like a protest against the pressure to do it.
And interesting there as well, obviously, people who weren't quite so fond of Metal Gear Solid 2 said the same about that. That was a direct critique about something being able to imitate its originator, and could it ever really match up to, could it ever, be the same? Yeah. And interestingly, a wonderful podcaster called Sean Bell from a podcast called Midnight Resistance posited about Dark Souls 2, that game being all about the cycle and all about the kind of derivative nature of that, ended up being a critique about how if you make a sequel, it's going to be an iteration of the first, and it's never going to be as good, and there's going to be this kind of fading memory aspect to it that's kind of a theme running through Dark Souls 2. And he didn't mean that in necessarily a negative way, just that it seemed like a reasonable assertion that could have been on the minds of the people making that game, knowing they had this kind of behemoth to live up to, and admitting to themselves early on that was just unobtainable because of the kind of mythos around the game that had already sprung up, just in the sort of 2-3 short years since Dark Souls had really become well known. And there's definitely that feeling with this game where it's almost like I could feel, especially in this area, Miyazaki just nudging me in the ribs, going, "Remember that, remember that, remember that." Yeah, it doesn't make sense, but remember it. It's just weird. It's really weird.
Yeah, it's and that idea of each next, each cycle, each next turn, kind of losing momentum is practically text in this.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now we need 5 Lords of Cinder in order to it's...
it was never a cycle, it's a spiral.
Exponential.
And it's all spirals. This game, the series is infested with spirals.
Yeah, well, so as am I. As is this entire town. So you kind of make your way to the other side of the dungeon here. One thing real quick you got in notes, I don't want to gloss over it, is when you get the Great Magic Shield from the Leech Monster, you open the door. The monster respawns, the door stays open. Which I like because it's the same thing that happens in Latria. Like in Latria, that was the risk reward. Like, do I want that treasure? If I take it every single time I have to go back here, I'm going to be crawling with hollows.
Yeah.
They're going to come out.
So it's funny because I was playing when I played through the first time, I saw that happen. I was like, oh well, now there's a leech in play every time I play this. And I was like, well, when I play through for the show, I'm just not going to do that because I'm probably not going to do a Great Magic Shield. Not that great of a spell for me. Right.
It's really specifically useful, isn't it? If you're I don't know what, I've never used it.
And so it just can you imagine, because I didn't write that down, what did I do? What did I do, Gary? I opened the door.
You opened the door again.
Because I want to fight the Leech Man.
Well, the other thing is actually that's at a dead end. Unless you get pushed off that ledge again, which that's kind of your own fault, to be fair.
Yeah, don't get pulled again.
You're not really going back down there. You don't have to pass that cell unless you've forgotten where you've been and got lost, which I think first time around this has a feeling of Latria in terms of in Latria there were 2 areas the size of this one, kind of next to one another, and you were crisscrossing between the 2 of them. So not just 2 walkways, but almost 4 laid out on 2 levels. And it was easy to get lost and get turned around. Here, because it's kind of half the size, it never felt like that was the case. Once I'd been through this area once, I knew exactly where I needed to go to get X key, to go through X door, down set of stairs Y. And where would be the quickest way to get through that. And the fact that it doesn't link across on the bottom level as well means that, again, kind of a linear path through this.
It's 4 hallways and a walkway. And I will say it only became an issue because when I got keys later on, I was like, all right, well, I just want to go back around and see where this opens up. I would be walking down that lower floor on the near side, and then just, here comes Leechy. I was like, well, okay, it's a minor inconvenience, but still, it is something you did on a previous cycle that has come back to bite you. It's a mosquito bite, but it's still a bite.
Yeah. Sure, and if you get caught by that thing, you're going to be reaching for the blood moss or suffering
your torch.
2 full bleeds. 2 full bleed stacks. Just to say, I think I said Great Magic Weapon earlier. It is Great Magic Shield that's here.
Yes.
To correct that.
Thank you. Yeah, because people will. I mean, I'm sure you know this. No slight too small.
No slight too small to disqualify you. Yeah.
Slight small anytime. Let's talk about stuff that we find on the far side of that dungeon, just kind of the enemies and stuff, because the actual moment to moment moving through the level, it has that real video game sense of, oh, this door is locked, but there also happens to be a cell with a broken wall through here, kind of thing. And that's when we run into the first one of these wretches that is non-aggressive. I like this thing.
So good.
Yeah,
because I'm walking around with a torch and its eyes just kind of like glow out of the darkness off of it.
Yes,
and it's non-hostile, so you're kind of creeping closer, waiting for the moment that it suddenly becomes hostile. But the sounds as you're before you even see it, the sounds that you hear coming out of there are just horrifying.
the sound of it existing.
It is, yeah, because you can just hear this scuffling, scratching kind of sound coming from behind the wall. And it's really unnerving. Really well done, but yeah, really unnerving.
These things are pretty interesting.
Yeah,
kind of from a lore perspective. So
they look like a slightly more successful version of the undead abominations from Dark Souls 2. Actually,
yes. Yeah. They are these kind of like baby dragon dog hybrid things,
and not baby like, ooh, look at this little dragonette and a pupper. No, it has a gigantic baby head. It's like a Silent Hill monstrosity.
Oval face, kind of big features, kind of big eye type look to it. Yeah, it's really bizarre.
The way that in real life the proportions of a baby are terrifying. Like if you were to just take a baby and Microsoft Paint
onto a big head, absolutely,
grab the corner and drew it out like just a human-sized baby.
I tell you what, they look like a very young version of Patrick Moore doing the Games Master TV show. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that. That was a UK specific video game show where this astronomer, this really well established sort of 80-year-old probably at that time astronomer, really sort of well-to-do, well-respected guy, had his head kind of blown up in this weird kind of distorted fashion as this Games Master of this TV show, answering questions that people would send in that he blatantly knew nothing about, but they give him a script, so it's fine. Right. And it's just that weird kind of distorted, blown up size head where, proportionally it's probably all still fine, but no, it's aspect ratio maybe a little bit off. It's just bizarre.
It reminds me of the baby head toy from Sid's house in Toy Story. Is what it does.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sure.
But my other favorite thing about it is their completely ineffectual, like tiny little turkey wings that they have sticking out of their back.
Yeah. Well, so these are, and they have these tailbone weapons that have dragon techniques. There are this is probably somebody trying to make dragons. We've seen this before in the series, like trying to turn humans into dragons. We saw those abominations, those kind of half dragon Eldia creatures in Dark Souls 2. That's probably what's going on here. It's not, it has kind of geographical relation to Archdragon Peak, but that way of turning into dragons is serene and successful. This has that feeling of trying to replicate something natural through like black science.
Yeah. I mean, this is Umbrella.
Yeah. I'm always going to respond really well to that. Like, black science is like my favorite, like subgenre of horror, this like, we can kind
like
of
George,
just
like George Washington Carver, like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it has a real air of kind of gene splicing gone wrong style.
Yes.
Yeah.
Horror to it, doesn't it? Like that kind of body horror type thing. They also go quite well, although they're not in the same area, or they're adjacent, with the monstrosity of sin creatures we'll come across later on.
Yeah.
In that, they just all proportionally in the way they move and the way they look. It's guttural kind of.
Design wise, yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just got excited. Design wise, this might be the strongest area in the game, like monster design wise, because we also have the spider ringoos down there, which are phenomenal.
Yeah,
so we just run into a lot of really fantastic looking monsters.
Yeah,
in this section. The monster game is super on point.
Yeah, this is the Aldea's Keep of this area, almost.
So
I guess the lore behind it doesn't necessarily always hold all of these together so well, but in terms of just the kind of Gestalt aesthetic and emotional response to it, definitely.
Yeah, from a monster manual perspective, and So the question as to why and who is turning people into dragons, no, I can't suss it out.
No,
right?
this
So,
is not a scientific organization.
No, it would make sense for Sullivan to be doing it just based on,
exactly.
where it's at, or for somebody from the Profaned capital. But like, we have a tie between Lothric and Osiris with turning into a dragon.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
we don't have that tie with Sullivan, so I have no idea why there are people being turned into dragons here.
Yeah, and there's no, as far as I know, I've kind of looked as much as I can. There's no mention of him experimenting in that way. Sullivan did a lot of bad things. He did a lot of stuff that was wrong, and he certainly tried to wield the Profane Flame. But any experimentation seems to be on the basis of controlling Profane Flame and with magical experimentation, not this sort of stuff, not Aldia stuff, where that all kind of worked.
Mm-hmm.
And also, this is a prison. This is not a lab. Why do they live? Gary, why do they live?
Why live?
Why do they live? Why didn't they just kill them and then just dump them down a pit? There are so many pits here.
Yeah. Like you could definitely have like a bunch of these. Like it would be equally creepy and awesome to find a bunch of these dead here, and then eventually find like a pit with some of them still alive.
Mm-hmm.
If that was. But the experimentation like kind of line of storyline here is really incomplete. It's another one of these like 40% done kind of like lines in this area. I feel like.
It's like, okay, somebody sketched something really creepy. Let's put it in this area that is earmarked as being especially creepy.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be cool if kind of ... and then just
cool covers a lot of sins.
It's so frustrating that like they have that dragon tail thing, because if they didn't have that, looking at them, they kind of look like they're being made into a dragon, but they also kind of look like they're being made into, like you said, a turkey. They could just be chimera. But the fact that it is explicitly like a dragon technique that comes from their bones just makes it like they're definitely like hybrid things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But why?
Yeah. Well, and they made them from the bones of each other in an attempt to escape, a vain attempt, but still one.
Yeah.
That's bizarre. And we've got them down here with basilisks as well, which don't necessarily share all that much in common, but in terms of long kind of reptilian body shape.
Oh, sure.
And big facial features, albeit basilisk, it's just the giant eye balloons that they've got on the front of their head. But again, wouldn't it kind of be interesting if they were a version of basilisks that had somehow been created down here? But they just, again, that's just me spitballing. There's no reason I would believe that, aside from you get assaulted by about 7 basilisks at one point down here.
Yeah.
Just cause.
And it's funny because like it sounds like what we're asking for is a sci-fi Dark Souls. I don't know that I want that.
I'd take it.
No, I'd be okay with it.
All right with that, my friend.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I wouldn't turn my nose up at it, but just I'm not clamoring for it as much as everybody is.
We don't need the series to go that way necessarily.
Right.
Yeah, I don't need it, but yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, just like that stripe of Aldia, kind of like alchemical almost experimentation. That's what I really, really enjoy. And so to kind of like see that, like, well, no, that actually kind of like reached a little bit of its apotheosis in Bloodborne, like just by following that Lovecraft kind of angle, and it's just kind of like, like now I'm thirsty for it. Like I just like if something is going to come at this particular king, they better make sure they don't miss.
Sure.
Yeah.
And this is a half measure as far as that, like a really great design with this kind of half measure.
It cuts a striking figure and it makes a fantastic first impression. Yeah. It was a great choice to make the first one non-hostile.
Yeah.
I killed it. I'm not going to lie. I killed it.
Oh, of course you did. Like it's like finding like a really, really bad bug in your house. Like it doesn't matter how non-hostile it is. Like,
I was doing it a favor. Yeah.
Yeah. If I use the rust gesture here, it's going to crawl into my eye. Like yeah. So there's kind of this introduces the 2 ways you can kind of get out of here. And we're going to actually go back in through here through shortcuts and stuff. It's kind of weird, but we can either get the jailbreak key and go out a window, which is one of the most useful, or like useless rather, like kind of ways out, because you could also just go downstairs and leave.
Yep.
Or you can go out the window and you get a little item, but it's weird that this is its own key.
Right.
So you can either go out through the top floor and kind of fall down onto this walkway, or you can go out the bottom floor.
Yeah.
and just kind of walk through this walkway, and we see we're in this transition zone between the dungeon and the Profaned capital. Like, we're still kind of in the dungeon. There's jail cells down here, but we're in this weird kind of transitional period.
Right. Like, we step out to this huge view of the of this kind of like tilted tower that makes up the most notable feature of the capital from above. I've seen comparisons to Irithyll or New Londo, but yeah, it's just kind of this tower rising from this bottomless void, it appears.
Yes. Yeah. There's a couple of little, like, kind of superfluous encounters, I feel like.
Yeah.
They're not really well designed or necessary.
Yeah, it's like just these two areas that have these peasants in them.
Yeah. Like there's one where it's just a guy with a crossbow covering another guy with melee with an ambush, which is, mildly interesting. And then there's just like a weird, what if there were 8 dudes?
Yeah, they come around the corner like 2 by 2 as well. It's like, well,
yeah,
that's just me doing the same thing 4 times. Oh, and then got a crossbow. All right.
Yep. and the most useful exit out of this place, and you don't know this until you explore. It's right there. It's like right to the right.
And I thought, like, I resisted that so much because I'm like, oh, this is gonna drop me into the shit.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is gonna drop me into a basilisk pit or something like that. But no, that's actually where you want to go. So you have these different exits, these little, like, just chutes. They're reminiscent of the depths,
right?
Kind of refuse sluices you can go through, or you can kind of make your way through and go down this ladder into this chamber with a giant. This was built around this giant. So I think there's something that explicitly says that.
Yeah, he was the first prisoner, and then the other prisoners were
the other cells around it. Yeah,
around his feet, which I can't imagine the smell steez is on point there.
Oh yeah,
so
it's all callous.
Very, very corny giant. But depending on where you drop down, you're kind of in a more or less advantageous position to try and get by this very, very sleepy boy. As he just kind of like is just taking a nap on the job, leaning against the counter.
Yes. I didn't know about being able to bypass him by dropping down the chute. So this ended up being a very frustrating encounter.
Yeah.
He's really hard to fight up here without cheesing him.
Yeah.
Hugely damage.
It's Cathedral of the Deep kind of all over again. That first giant you encounter there.
Yeah.
Well, but with much less room to maneuver.
Yeah, exactly.
Even less. But on that first encounter, I was like, yeah, this isn't happening. I'm not going to beat this guy this way. And then you realize you can just go and do the world's slowest, most boring fight around his ankles. And it's kind of the same here, but there's also a crystal lizard there where you're like, well, I kind of want to get the crystal. Oh, no, I'm dead. Okay.
It's especially frustrating because even if you do get past him, if you wake him up and then try to go to the ladder, you're still on a ladder with this incredibly angry giant who can just slap you off of it.
Yeah. It is a bummer to try to run past his things, and it's a bummer to hit him with a billion arrows in the head to try to fight him, and it is a bummer to fight him in his feet. He's kind of a bummer all around.
So the one thing that you can do, so there's all these chutes down to the right hand side, and then there's the gate off to the left hand side with the ladder behind it. But the last of the chutes, if you go round the corner to the right, clear out all the peasant hollows and get to the ending, clear out the one with the crossbow. The last chute takes you up onto a ledge behind him, and you can kind of just walk down this rocky ledge out to this sort of sewer grate where the rats all are, and he doesn't wake up if you go down there. So you if you're willing to tackle the sort of mobs up top, you can kind of take the last exit on the right.
Okay. Well, the first exit on the right will put you past his arms.
Right.
So if you land there and you don't touch him, you can just walk by as well, and he won't wake up.
To the narrow ledge on the far right hand side. That's the one, isn't it?
Yeah. So you can go either one of those. You just don't want to do the middle one, or actually just climb down and smack him in the hand.
Okay. Yeah. Don't piss off Giant.
Yeah. Do not hurt Giant.
Okay. Cool.
He helps anytime. So you kind of make your way past there into this so you can drop down to the floor here as well. You can also come back later. And this is this weird rat zone where they don't spawn endlessly. It just feels like they do.
Yeah, it's a mini Vanguard.
Yes. Rats just come forever, and which is kind of frustrating because there's an NPC here that you want to talk to, and rats are going to come up and nip at your heels while you try to do it.
Right. And better hope and pray that you don't accidentally hit one of those ankles.
Oh, yeah.
While he's doing it.
While you're down here. Or, you do it and you just fight him and the rats at the same time. But this is where Sigurd has been interred.
Right.
Since the last time we saw him was up in the kitchen, up in Irithyll. This is the path he took, and he is now, there's nothing really here for how he got trapped or anything. He just found himself trapped.
It was probably one of the jailers or something like that.
Yeah.
Like that is the only thing. They couldn't brand through his armor, so they just locked him away until they figured out how to get around that problem.
Sure.
Kind of feels like they just threw a flask of Estus soup in there and he ran after it, really excited. They just closed the door behind him,
They put a box with a string and a stick.
Yeah, exactly.
And he mentions his duty is near. He's got his duty to do. He's mentioned that a couple of times. Talked about his duty when we've mentioned him or seen him before.
Yeah, but that's about it. He doesn't provide any real context for what he's here for. Like, it's just, I've got myself in a fix again, ho hum, and that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we instead, so we head back, back up, or we make our way back up to this kind of sewery section that is full of rats.
Yeah.
Here.
And we get the Profaned Flame pyromancy, not the Profaned Flame, just a Profaned Flame.
Yeah, because the pyromancy is not so good as to cause all this.
No.
If it's this thing that literally melts the flesh off of City of Men, which will do, 200 damage if you happen to catch somebody in your very slow pyromancy arc.
Yeah. This is also the land of mimics. This probably has more mimics per capita.
So we've already come past one by this point.
Yeah. There's
just
the
on the
Estus
way
shard
into the giant cell tower.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is the fuck you mimic. This is the mimic where don't give me lightning great arrows. Like, something that 2% of builds can use.
Yeah, it's a niche within a niche of builds. Yeah.
Yeah,
and not only, but also as you're fighting that mimic, there's a sizable army of basilisks coming down behind you.
Oh, that's the other one. This one you have the rats coming in after you. Yeah, because we're not in the rat tunnel yet. No, that's another kind of fuck you.
Oh yeah, there are multiple little. They're kind of similar situations.
Yeah,
they're kind of nearby because there's the one. You're right. There's the one on the ground floor and then the one up top, where you kind of go through, and there are lots of rats and a mimic, and a mimic that you don't really need to.
No, because
bother with.
The item that you need to get, the old cell key, talks about this is where you get the description about the cell built for a giant. That one isn't a non-trapped kind of guy, and you will think that you're A-okay because you fought the rats getting back here. After you open that particular chest, basilisks spawn in, and if you go over in a hurry, like I did the first time that I played this and tried to open the second one without checking the chain and reciting the rhyme to yourself, chain curls in, treasure within, chain curls out, better watch out. Then here comes a mimic, and fighting him isn't really even worth it because it is just the dark clutch ring.
Yeah. Who gives a rip? Like it is the treasure per mimic. Like I remember when mimics meant something, man. Make mimics great again. Like,
well, especially given how tough they are in this game. Because I don't know about you, but certainly if I wasn't playing for an optimized build, I was just playing through the first time. None of them are as hard as that first one in the very first area.
Yeah.
That you get the deep battle axe from. Just because the damage output, but they're still pretty tough. You're not taking them down in a few swings like you could in Dark Souls 2. If you just, you knew it was there, so you just, primed your weapon, buffed it, and 2 or 3 swings and they're down before they've even got up in some cases. That's not happening here. Certainly not for me. With a Lothric Night Sword or whatever, you're just not doing the damage. So,
I mean, most a lot of builds are kind of underpowered in this game, I think. There's also, so that ludically they're kind of frustrating because every one of them is, takes longer than I want it to be and is more challenging than I want. They're also more carelessly placed in this game than any other game. Like they're not protecting. Remember Dark Souls 1 when it was significant that a mimic guarded some of Havel's treasure? Now what could be the possible significance of these lightning great arrows?
And then,
of a consumable,
and then
it is
Dark Souls 2, each of them carried the dark gear.
Yeah. Like it meant something that it was part of the storytelling that it was a mimic. Here, it feels like every other chest is replaced with a mimic, in this bizarre shell game, that for no particular reason. Like there are exceptions, like we're going to run to a mimic later that does have some significant kind of dark stuff that you'd want to protect, but then there's tons of times where it's just nothing, and it bums me out, man.
Actually, you're right. I can't think of a single item I got from a mimic that I actually used, because clutch rings. Nah, come on. If I'm focusing on a pyromancy only build, okay, I might use the fire clutch ring, but probably not, because they decimate your defense. So
the deep axe is actually really good for when you get it. That will serve you really well for a while, but it's not commensurate with the risk and the effort you put in.
That stage in the game, that's a tough fight.
Like the notable thing about this item is that it actually is something from Londor, and items that make direct reference to the Sable Church of Londor are kind of in short supply. But that is not a commensurate reward for the mechanical risk that you have to take to do it.
So when you go up to the kind of sewer part with the basilisks and rats, you head off to a tunnel. There are 2 gigantic rats here, just kind of for funzos. And then you open up into this huge dungeon floor here.
Right.
I had I have to not eat crow, but like I fucked up my first time through this because the path to the left to the shortcut, I didn't see for one reason or another. I didn't see the item, or I was too distracted by all the jailers. Or I was too distracted by being low on health and everything. So I, was screaming for a bonfire. Like this felt like such a long stretch. And the dungeons upstairs, I was still kind of methodically clearing it because didn't know exactly how the mechanic with the health drain worked. And I didn't know about the shortcut past the giant. So I had to stop and fight the giant or get past him every time. And I was really frustrated by this. And I was like, this is the longest stretch between bonfires in like this entire game. Like, where's my fucking shortcut? And then once I found out there's a shortcut right there, it was kind of better. But this was really frustrating for me for a little while to have this entire slog up to this point have the capper be, this thing that you've kind of been methodically slowly dealing with. Here's 8 of them at once.
And there's always one more than you think there are. There's always that one who's just completely out of sync with the rest. Around the back of the pillar.
Carla.
Just long enough that you sort of let your guard down. I think part of the reason you missed that shortcut on the right, I don't mean you, I mean one misses that shortcut on the right, on the left, sorry, as you enter, is the way where you enter the room is really far along that wall towards that left-hand wall. So the room opens out to the right, and you've got all those enemies there, and it's lighter down there. So naturally your attention just turns to that. Plus, as you say, there's like 8 of the worst enemies you've faced so far. Even if you do see the shortcut, though, if you go up there, you come up at the other end of one of those hallways. So if you haven't cleared out those enemies because you took the shortcut out the window, it's not an easy route back to get to a bonfire even that way. So it's difficult being down here at this point.
Let's address the other stuff that's on that shortcut path real quick. Before we move into the right, just so we can kind of get it out of the way. This is a really weird little tableau that's really jarring with everything we've seen so far.
Because we are kind of like sticking out. We're on this little outcropping on the side of kind of these Irithyll cliffs, right?
During the day.
Right.
Or
like it's a little bit night. Like you can look up, you can recognize the Irithyll kind of like skybox.
But it's significantly lighter. It's not as gloomy as it was, last time I feel like we saw daylight through here. It's like, it feels like to me it felt like a very like big kind of 180. It's much better lit than anything we've been through. It feels like a different area to me, which makes sense since it's the vestibule for another area.
But kind of arranged along this ledge, there's almost like a little shrine or altar with these knights who are kind of like kneeled, prostrating, prostrate. There we go. One of those is in a butt. Along with like a dragon statue, which we'll recognize from the first game as kind of being somebody who is using the dragon torso stone, and in fact, we pick one up there.
Yes, which will turn your dragon into a torso and give you
turn your torso into a dragon.
Yes, there we go. It doesn't just turn a dragon into a freestanding torso, which would be fantastic. Like awesome, like Dracomancy you can do. I ain't scared no torso. But the torso gives you like a buff, correct? Like you can actually do this little scream when you have it.
Yeah.
And it buffs your stats, I believe, which is instrumental in a lot of the kind of one-hit challenge stuff people have done.
Mm-hmm.
So like the guy who parries Sullivan and kills him in one hit, who stacked every buff in the game, this is necessary for that.
Yeah.
And the item description references Archdragon Peak, which is the like challenge optional area.
Yeah.
In this game that we're going to get to really late in the season, probably right before the end.
It's the last thing you want to do before you face the final boss, basically.
It's very hard.
Yeah.
We've actually seen this peak. You can see it from parts of Irithyll as well. There's a kind of an island area kind of floating off in the distance.
Yeah.
That is Archdragon Peak. You can also get the Lightning Blade Miracle here, which I can confirm is not worth it. It's not very good. If you feel like doing 40 extra damage per swing, putting in the stat investment to have the faith to do that, go for it. But buffs kind of suck in this game.
Plus having to use FP to do that, presumably, and therefore potentially want to allocate some of your Estus to that if you're not already. I mean, it's not going to happen, is it? Just use some resins. Fine. Seriously.
Cost is way too high.
Yeah.
This ends up being a very useful shortcut. You can just cut a direct line back down here, and if you're like me, you're going to have to take a couple of runs at this kind of dungeon floor area where the jailers are doing their little march.
It's dense and very difficult.
Right.
I find
because
when I first was talking about that, cue tons of people saying it's not hard, which is like that's so useful.
Yeah.
Keep on doing that, internet people.
Yeah.
When somebody says something is hard, telling them it's not.
Oh, you mean it's not hard?
Oh
really?
Shit! I didn't even consider that.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah.
It was hard all this time. Wow.
Perhaps the problem is with me.
Yeah, I think it's
Perhaps
past
I'm
this
a bad
guy.
person.
Huh. Wow. Maybe you should just stop playing games altogether.
Probably. I'm not qualified.
Gary,
if only there was somebody who could tell me whether I was qualified.
Yeah, Gary, I'm going to need you to give me your half of the amulet.
Fuck. Well, it's
I love that. Someone just says, it's not hard. Like they've just presented you the Rosetta Stone or something, It's not hard. Here you go, decipher the world. Thanks.
Have you considered that something's easy once you know how to do it? I find this encounter really hostile and one of the toughest in the game. And then when you actually slowly, methodically clear it out with archery, one of the most tedious in the game. I kind of hate this room. It is a great image, them kind of walking in the doing around the rosy, just walking in the
jailers
circle.
taking their 15, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. I like this it visually, but boy, is it tedious to actually clear out. And if you don't make it to that next bonfire and you have to do this multiple times, well, it's more tedious.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you don't deal with these, there are these rooms off of this whole area that you're going to want to go to because there's relevant stuff there, and they're going to come find you and make any of these other encounters difficult to impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially as a couple of the items you're going to pick up in those rooms are of the wailing variety and will draw anyone around. So yeah. And the rooms in and of themselves, a couple of them aren't easy either. They've got tough enemies or tough groups of enemies in, so you do really want to clear out the central area.
Yeah.
There's kind of a strat you can do. There's a lycanthrope down here that will aggro to the jailers if you let him out.
Yeah.
The same way we talked about this in the PvP episode, actually, and I didn't realize it would have so much, or that would have bearing on PvE, but the way that enemies that are aggressive to other enemies works is kind of slipshod. So he doesn't prioritize the jailers.
No.
If you don't kind of lead him perfectly, he will just attack you, and then the jailers will attack you, and they'll team up. You can get him to attack the jailers. I've done it before, but it's not 100% reliable.
Yeah.
To do so.
The enemy of my friend is a thing indeed.
Yeah.
I mean, the problem with that is you would have to run past all that group of jailers, and there's another one up on that walkway that the entrance to that cell is. Yeah. In order to open that cell and then presumably run back past all of the jailers. Meanwhile, your health is just nothing at this point.
Yeah.
And get away far enough that they'll aggro on one another, I guess. So I figured it might be possible, but I've never even tried to do it just because it seems far safer to clear out all the jailers first, and probably the mimic as well.
Just to articulate the particular way this will fuck you. This will fuck you. No, it's so all of them firing off their lanterns at once will just reduce the margin for error down to nothing.
Yes, you'll die in one hit once these things start doing that, and that's if you do it that way. Alternatively, you shoot one in the head with an arrow. It scuttles over to you. You duck back into the giant rat room, wait for it to turn the corner, stun lock it, and then just repeat that a bunch of times.
Yeah.
And live with the fact that their brand will clip through the doors and corners. So stand back a bit,
Yeah.
So it's like I don't like the encounters in this room really at all. Like this feels like a lot of just kind of what if there were a bunch of something, and just on the heels of Rat Floor and the 8 guys in the room leading up to the giants. Like when people complain about the biggest comparison people make, other than the actual demon ruins, between areas in Dark Souls 3 and Dark Souls 1 is like, this Profaned Capital is kind of like Isolith, in that it feels unfinished. And it does, even down to this encounter design thing. When people talk about just copy pasting enemies in Isolith, like it's kind of what this feels like. I don't want to use language that's that dismissive, but these just like, what if there are 8 enemies in a room are not really, it doesn't have that kind of like chess-like, planning execution.
Here's a different combination of enemies. How are you going to deal with these? Not
exactly.
Just here's 8 of these things you've wanted to fight one at a time.
Yeah.
We have the processing power to make a bunch of these things happen at once.
Yeah.
We have to indulge in it.
It's a frustrating situation where I wish that there was a way to outsmart this arrangement or a route to outsmart this that didn't just go through tedium country.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Or something environmental to use or whatever it might be. But just.
Yeah, like a exploding barrel that you could lead them all into, or a chandelier that you could shoot down, like almost anything, like
or
just
even
something that wasn't
open the cell with the lycanthrope in it from a distance, so you can start them off fighting one another. Almost like on the way up to the Abyss Watchers,
with the Dark Wraiths.
You can skirt around the side and let the Dark Wraiths fight the crew, and kind of then pick off the victors, as it were. Mm-hmm. Which, absolutely. Let's face it, is the Dark Wraiths. It feels inelegant to me. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So, but there's a bunch of other stuff in these side passages once you deal with the kind of main attraction here.
Right.
There's the nursery.
That's a wonderful way to put it.
Yeah. Where babies live. That's where babies come from.
So we keep the babies. And these ones are hostile. We've encountered a couple of hostile ones up to this point, but this is a room that is full of them, and they are guarding the profaned Kole.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is the version of you that comes out after dark. So the profaned Kole is when Dark Gary and profaned Kole come out. We do our Triple X Logan Grinder podcast.
Yeah. I can't even do like a riff off of that because it would just be profane.
It'd be pretty foul.
Yeah, it would. Just I don't like that guy. I don't like profane Kole.
You don't want to talk about prostates.
There wouldn't be much of a difference, I guess. Fuck. But the profaned Kole, this is just another one of these things you can give to Andre, right? You can make dark blood or hollow infusions, right? Mm-hmm. Use those particular gems. This is kind of the remnant of the fire that burned down the Capitol and is kind of kept in this cool skull. The thing that's notable about this, like this gets a particular a specific response out of Andre, which is rare. He feels betrayed that you bring this to him. Like this is foul, and like I'm going to do my duty, but I'm not going to like it.
Yeah. So I mean, again, a couple things that definitely tie this area and the Profaned Flame to the Abyss as being something that is abyssal.
Right.
I suppose the other thing is that we didn't actually say. So when you come out of the distant manor, you're actually going back into the same mountain range that the catacombs of Karthus you came out of. So the fact that they both tie to the Abyss in some way, shape, or form, being underground and being deep kind of leads you to think that anyway. But yeah, it kind of ties back in that and makes sense that the Profaned Capital and the Profaned Flame should also tie to the Abyss.
Yeah, I lost my orientation in there. I didn't realize you were doing that.
Yeah, it could be, it just literally, proximity, to something that makes sense for that.
I suppose it's kind of in a way where from the Tomb of the Giants you can see through to Demon Runes. They are adjacent to one another, but you don't get to traverse between them in the game.
So.
Yeah. The other room, there is a room with a baby in it, like a glowing. And some of these have these glowing knives, which is visually just awesome. I want to make sure that's noted how cool these look in the dark. We can also go get the Xanthus set.
Yes, in the room with the lycanthrope.
So we get some Irithyll stuff to make this the second Irithyll in the game.
And this is, we talked about the retcon that happens here. We mentioned this back in Fair and Keep, but their effort to tie Xanthus study to Irithyll, specifically because of the golden character and quality of their sorceries and the stuff that's associated with it, it feels like spit in my eye a little bit. Like Xanthus stuff is a thing. Like it is Xanthus King Jeremiah. Like he was sent away. He was exiled because of his kind of like profane insanity almost that kind of like comes down from the old monk. I almost called him the Yellow King. Like that feels like it was already built up into this thing, and to have that whole sect kind of reduced down to just these nerds who happen to be affiliated with a color feels a little off to me.
Yeah. It's not necessary to do so, to combine those two things. Like in a game where they introduce like a bunch of different kinds of giants and a bunch of different flames to kind of confuse things. Like I honestly didn't feel like Xanthus needed to be explained.
No.
It's like number 40 on a list of answers to questions I didn't want answered. I was pretty cool with Xanthus being its own thing. And
So, they go about now referring to them as the Xanthus Scholars. So the fact that they are interested not just in pyromancy, as you would be led to believe from Jeremiah, but all forms of magic you could take away from this game, because there's enough to suggest that, okay, maybe they're just interested in all forms of magic. They are now scholars of all forms, as opposed to Vinheim Dragon School, which is very much sorcery based. And that would be fine again, but there is this notion that now this is just a uniform they wear. And as long as you're a bit over the edge in terms of how safe you're willing to be with magic and wear yellow,
you're welcome to the club.
And also you're going to wear this incredibly large, inconvenient, and goofy hat because you want your head to look like Elizabeth.
Like a mushroom. It does just feel a bit like, hey, the way we ended up redesigning that original old monk's helm kind of looks a bit like a mushroom, doesn't it? Oh, I've never noticed that before. Let's just make it the same. It doesn't ever feel like that was something that was established, like pre-established at all.
Yeah. I agree. Like it is just a little bit, it's just a little unnecessary to me. And it's one of those monkey saw things where I love Xanthus King Jeremiah, and I love the old monk is one of my favorite bosses on record. Like I love all that stuff on its own. I just kind of liked the mystery rather than the explanation they slotted in. So much so that I would have preferred not to have an explanation. It also ends up being like we have an area that was really explicitly like Irithyll, in this very game, right? So we find the Dust Crown ring here, that kind of ties this to Xanthus stuff. But in Farron's Keep, we also found Dusk's like headgear and stuff. So what's going on? Like they're both abyss touched, but they're nowhere. I mean, you could just have the continents sliding, and maybe they were close to each other at some point.
What's crazy about it is like Farron's on top of all of this. If this is below Karthus, and Farron is you get to Karthus by going below Farron, like this is like this in a weird way is pancaked on top of each other. I don't know how it migrated like that, but like there is like longitudinal kind of like synchronicity here.
There's longitudinal synchronicity, but one, you have like the Karthus thing, like the Karthus layer, which like has to kind of be explained. That does not seem to tie to these things, other than the fact that they're both kind of abyssy, which again you could have just kind of abyssness, being a business, ending up proximity based. But this isn't a question of proximity.
Nope.
It's a question of like it literally, the same character showing up.
Mm-hmm.
The same. So we have the Mushroom family and we have Dusk's hat showing up in one place and her ring and the Xanthus stuff, which is now retroactively tied to Irithyll, showing up in another place.
Yeah.
And it doesn't, it just doesn't feel additive to me. Like
all that I can think of is somebody was taken from somewhere else and interred here because they are in a cell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess there's that notion of, multiple countries or towns lay claim to being the birthplace of X person or like with Shakespeare or whatever, visited such and such place. And it's a bit like, well, we've got a crown, well, we've got a ring, it's
yeah.
I can see, okay, yeah, that happens. But in a world where you're presenting a lore, even if it's a vague lore, even if it's supposed to be pieced together, it feels muddled in a way that, so because there's a Xanthus set here, we put the ring here as well, just to tie these two things together. But why are they there? Yeah, they're in a cell, but we don't know who's being kept in these cells. There's not really a lot of information to that. There's a werewolf guy with, a crucifix on his back, and there's a bunch of hollows, but there's no, I guess, Carla aside, there's no notion of the sorts of people that are being put in here, when laid alongside, say, the Painted World of Ariamis, where there's a theme there as to who is in these cells, who presents the threat, and who has ended up there. And there's not that here.
Yeah, it made it like it's not just like who's there, but why.
Yeah.
Like we can understand why somebody would jail them, but why would these people jail them? Like what threat was this thing that is, by all the evidence that we found before in Ferrand, is like long past.
Right.
Like how do they have time to be jailed when they should just be dead, like the Mushroom family was? At one point we're showing them imprisoned, and another one we're showing them kind of rotting on the ground. It's inconsistent in a really frustrating way to me. That it doesn't ruin the area. The area is still very cool, but again, the cool things are the new stuff that it brings. It's not these tiebacks. Like they don't work.
Or the more kind of mechanical callbacks, like to Latria. Thematically, there's not necessarily a great deal that's similar, but in terms of aesthetics and the way that the kind of the place works, if you like, it's all very similar. But yeah, it then just feels like, again, they got out their Logan grinder, and this time they put in the yellow peppercorn, so it's Xanthus.
We run into Carla here, who, to my mind, is also a little bit of a missed opportunity. This lady. She is one, ludically, I don't like how late in the game you can learn dark stuff. You have to get through a lot of this game before you can start using your dark Braille tomes guilt-free, or use your dark pyromancy tomes at all. Here.
Yeah. So Carla is a witch who is associated with the Abyss, and in fact might actually be like a daughter of the Abyss, like in a Manus kind of sense, like a fragment of it. As we learn from her ashes, she kind of like phases in and out of reality at its fringes. And she is kind of the person who you're supposed to take anything associated with the dark to, and she will kind of like pinch her nose and do the divine stuff, but she's more than happy to go for the pyromancies.
She's a super flirt.
Yep. Good to know a skinny little heretic can still turn heads.
Yeah. Like she like, when you talk to her, like even down, you get all of her dialogue and stuff. Like she's pretty flirty, pretty kind of flippant about this stuff. Like she's got that kind of like attitude. And the thing, like she, we know that, so Alva, was after her for one reason or another. Like that makes sense for Alva, since he's kind of doing a version of his mission that he had before. It's not like Alvia has a big place in the story. Carla doesn't have a huge place in the story either. We don't, like, it's this weird, the dialogue drought that happens with these characters where I want them just to say more things other than, I'm going to sell you something fluff, like a couple lines just before they sell you something. Like, we know she's a daughter of the Abyss. Like pretty much what we got.
The spurned child of the Abyss. Like she may have been spurned or have spurned Alva. As that goes.
But we don't know, what she's here, and there doesn't actually need to be a anything else other than the fact that she's a reference to Uria. So she's a daughter of the Abyss. She's also Uria from Demon Souls.
Right.
You kind of find her in a similar way.
Same VO actress. She's also the VO artist who did Imposter Yosefka.
Yeah.
Or playing Yosefka, I forget.
Yeah.
If it's a 50-50, I'm going to get it wrong. So
yeah, so you can get her, you can save her, but there's not like, an NPC storyline really for her that I can find online without tons of stretches. Right. She goes back to your zone, will read dark things for you. Doesn't like reading miracles, but will do it.
Mm-hmm. Well, she gets self-conscious, like she's embarrassed, like, okay, well, this is out of my wheelhouse, but we'll try it. Like, don't laugh at me if I mess it up.
I tell the story badly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's the goth kid who doesn't really want to be seen listening to pop music.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's so good. Yeah.
They're undeniably good songs. You can't.
Yeah. Yes, I've got a Taylor Swift CD. CD. Come on. Oh, jeez. Yeah. Oh, I'm old, apparently. Let's move on. I've killed it.
No, it's just I'm just thinking how much I identify with it. So that's the last of the noteworthy stuff here at the bottom of the dungeon, and so we're able to kind of get a closer look at the actual capital. We step out beyond the circling mass of jailers and get up to this tower, as we see, and right as we cross the threshold on this bridge and get the Profaned Capital title card, down comes a gargoyle.
Yes.
Gargoyle. The gargoyles in previous games are, I guess, technically stone, certainly in Dark Souls 2, but these have a kind of hewn from stone effect to them. They've got this kind of sort of raw weathered effect on their skin, if you like, or on their outer surface.
They've been through some stuff, it looks like.
Yeah.
And like this will be a very familiar kind of gargoyle fight. I think the biggest wrinkle that I've seen, or at least what I noticed the most this time, is that they will actively use their wings as shields. Yeah, and as they'll
parry you or bat you with them as well.
Like they'll turtle up and then kind of lure you in, or as you're trying to get away, when they release that block, it kind of explodes out and hits you.
Yeah. And then they have these kind of torches. Some of the statuary here kind of looks similar to these torches, are holding similar things that they can use that have a fire element to them. They are not I don't think these are a bad fight as long as you're fighting one of them. I think they're pretty fun to fight. They get frustrating when you're fighting them in kind of mixes. But so you're heading towards this tower. You get to it, you get to the top, and we run into Laddersmith Gilligan.
Why?
It's just a joke.
Yeah.
It's just he's dead, and there's thousands of ladders next to him. I think it's just it's a goof.
Yeah. I don't know. It's funny. I appreciate the goof, but when I try to apply it's a little bit like a disinformation campaign.
Like chaff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's clearly an area that has been sort of completely rent apart by the fire that came down upon it. So suddenly you had what presumably was this giant city or certainly significant space that could be traversed. And there are no staircases to traverse. You're walking along kind of very steep-sided, broken kind of walkways. So it would make sense. You need lots of ladders here to kind of be able to traverse. So it kind of feels like Laddersmith Gilligan just came in after the fact and started nailing up ladders left, right, and center, and then just expired from overexertion or something. I don't know.
Yeah, that was thousands of years ago.
Yeah. It is. So we have two paths we can kind of go through here. Either heading down on one side of this tower or the other side. We'll do the non-critical path first, because the critical path you can get there in about 40 seconds. We can be done with this area right now if we want to, but we have to go.
How many mimics you want to fight, I suppose.
Exactly. So we're gonna head down to the swamp church.
Yeah. Which
is one more swamp always needed.
Oh yeah, why not? Just bring company
room for Swampo.
Yeah. Swampo.
Yeah, it's Buffo and Wuffo's closet brother. We thought Wufo was the attic brother. And
Swampo the Cajun clown. Yeah.
Mon amis. So we head down. There's this little trap room that is reminiscent of
again more
Parts of
depths.
The Depths. Yeah, where the crystal lizards and rats will try to shepherd you towards these pits that lead down to Swamp Church that's full of spider ringoos and toxic.
Yeah. This is the toxic swamp. So like you're in big trouble if you try and linger here.
It's full of urine, big trouble. Like, because urine and pee and poop is big trouble. Profane Kole.
Why did you? You turned into like. Why are you talking to me like a baby? I don't know.
Huh? Well, because I'm turning into a dragon.
But yeah, if you drop here, you're gonna have to trudge through this toxic stuff. Thankfully, if you successfully navigate the narrow pathways, not only do you find a shiny rusty coin where real treasure should be.
I hate the rusty coin section. Things of this.
You also get some purple moss here as well. So that is that is good, but you're gonna have to walk through this. There's not so much down there that you need to get. Like there's a curse by ring, poison gem, shriving stone, all kind of boilerplate. But these ringoos, the centipede demon kind of guys, they are not slowed down, so they're going to converge on you and they'll chase you really far into this next area when you go to Swamp Church.
They have like no real leash,
right?
Heading into Swamp Church, you run into another one of these really fantastic enemy designs. These monstrosities of sin, which are clearly like based, like I imagine their moveset is based on the hippo, like the ogres from Dark Souls 2.
Ogre, very much. Especially, because they will try and sit and roll on you, and if you spend a lot of time looking at their back, it looks exactly the same. It's their head that looks different.
Yeah, it's kind of like wrinkly elephant skin almost.
Definitely.
On their malformed carriage. We're kind of burying the lead here because the most striking thing about them is that they have gigantic hands for heads, 6-fingered hands that have kind of these manus tumors on the inside of them.
Yeah. Yes, it looks very similar to the hand that grabs you and takes you into the abyss.
Right.
In the upcoming DLC for Dark Souls 3. Each hand, each of their actual individual hands and their mega hand has more than 5 fingers. Like they're fantastic looking.
Yeah,
there's a real body horror thing going on. Yeah.
They're surreal in a way that Dark Souls isn't always surreal, where it's biologically surreal. Like this just feels like a weird Grant Morrison creation.
Yeah, I was going to invoke that.
Yeah. Like much more than like a creature that could ever occur in nature.
It very much is exactly as terrifying as Hands for Heads sounds like it should be, especially as the fact when you walk into that church, so you've already trudged through poison and presumably taken out all of the already incredibly creepy kind of, as you said, centipede demon, ringu girl looking demons, but your first encounter with them, actually, it's just curled up lying on its side, one of them, asleep, ostensibly, and we know that thing's getting up, so inevitably you pull out a bow or a throwing knife or whatever, and then it kind of rolls over and turns around, and you're just like, oh, what have I done? This was a bad idea.
Hands for Heads is even more terrifying than they seem because I've audited them, and it is the worst charity that I've ever seen in my 36 years on this earth.
Congratulations on holding on to that while I was rabbiting on.
Well, Gary, how else are the former members of the Talking Heads going to actually eat? It's a tough life out there if you're if you're walking in the shadow.
Help Tina Weymouth. You are her base. No, not that one. So these guys, I actually like fighting 1-on-1 as well. It's similar to that, but I don't like fighting them, 3-on-1.
Yeah, and the upper floors, it gets to be a bit much.
Yes.
Yeah.
They have a grab. They drain your humanity there. And one of them drops this Eleonora axe, which we mentioned.
Yeah.
And this is the axe that says, oh, wait, no, the Profaned Flame had nothing to do with Yorm. It was because of these mystics, these oracles.
Yeah.
These certain women.
That kind of like indolently allowed it to happen.
Yes.
Like it was like negligence or decadence that led to it.
Yeah. So,
but they also throw in relatives of a certain oracle. It's like, what? Who? I mean,
that really feels like something that should have been cut from the game. Or
is that Dusk? Because we've just seen Dusk's ring. She's an oracle. I mean,
yeah. That would make sense just by proximity, but not. Yeah.
And again, relatives of a certain oracle screams daughters of the Witch of Izalith doesn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
especially given we're talking about a profaned flame, which profaned could be seen as, a synonym for that would be sin. And that brings us back to Lost Sinner, who was the reincarnation of Witch of Izalith in Dark Souls 2. So there's real mixed message stuff going on with the profaned flame, and none more so in that item description.
Additionally, an oracle could also be one of the daughters of Manus. Alongside that, remember there is a chaos association with I forget her name from the Eliam Lois as well. Again, all of Dark Souls 2 isn't a memory hole, but that is another possible angle.
Yeah. So again, I hope, I don't, not banking on it, but it'd be neat if some of this stuff was addressed. Yeah. Somehow, like in a DLC or something squared the circle and made this make more sense.
Yeah.
I would be into it. You kind of head up to the outside of this church, where you run into this guy who you end up like fighting. Like it's not an invader, it's an NPC.
Right.
So he's not a phantom.
No.
Yeah, I think he's just referred to as an unkindled. Essentially,
Yes.
he's just another unkindled in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's there, kind of like using Logan's sorcery. And in fact, when you kill him, you get Logan's scroll.
Yes. And this is where it says, like, lots of people claimed Logan's legacy. And, like, we know, but why didn't you choose to have one group claim it? So it's kind of a tough fight, too, because you're on this. It's kind of cool because you're on these, like, weird rooftops. There's lots of interesting tactical things to this fight.
Yeah.
Retreating has a lot of risks because you may have run past the hands, or if you retreat too far, you end up in the toxic swamp. Otherwise, you have to be very sure of your footing. Like, it's kind of a cool fight.
Yeah.
You've also got the kind of open area on top of the roof that you can kind of kite around as well. But I think the thing is, when you come upon an aggressive sorcerer like this guy is, your inclination is, right, I want to get close. I want to get up close. And no, he's handy. He's handy up close as well.
Yep.
So, you really want to kind of be measuring your dodges and your rolls and being very careful with your spacing on this one. Playing footsies, if you will, to find a fighting game term.
Yeah. It is a good fight.
Yeah.
There's also, this is the really obscure way you free Sigurd, which I'm saving my Sigurd thoughts for a little bit later, but you jump through this window across a gap to get to his, the least convenient jail cell in the world to get to.
At least it's a safe gap. Like you're just over a stairway. So you're not like, risking a run up to do it.
Yeah. And you let him out. He thanks you. He gives you a Titanite slab. You can also find the covetous gold serpent ring in his room, which kind of has interesting text too. It talks about, a serpent that could have been but never will be a dragon. There's this great bit like where it's like, if your shackles start to bind you, why not engage in some good old fashioned greed? Which I like that flavor.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, not a lot of text here from Sigurd. He's just like, I'm on to do my duty. If you've done his duty for him and then come rescue him, I think you have to kill him to get the slab. At that point, it ends up becoming kind of tricky. But you can kill Yorm, which is his duty, spoiler, and then talk to him later, and he'll just thank you for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it is fiddly. So the actual mechanics of getting that specific outcome are not. I don't know them.
Right. Yep. Dark Souls 3 NPCs.txt.
Yeah. Exactly.
There's a way back into the dungeon itself. You can get by the feet of the giant there, and there's
they introduce invisible jailers.
Yeah,
it's so weird to throw that in at this point.
Why?
It's just like, why didn't they have them like drop down or come in from a place, like, because I understand what they're setting up. Like, you walk into this hallway, you're like, oh wow, I'm appreciating that you're seeing a place from before. It's always a cool feeling. You get the jailkeeper's key ring, which lets you open up some doors from before they were frustratingly locked, and then there's just an ambush waiting for you.
Yeah.
But like just the idea that they're, this place is lit up with orange soapstone messages saying like, hey, attack here, and they're right there. Like, that feels like such a hack.
Yeah.
It's really weird. Yeah. I mean, how many ways have we seen different ambushes? As you say, you drop down from above, come from around the corner, flank you from either side of the door. There's any number of things they could have done just to suddenly make them invisible for the first time and have two of them standing there again for no reason. It just seems really weird.
Again, Dark Souls 3, afraid of quiet time. Like this could have been like this widow, this little like, oh, I'm going back through here. I've got a feeling of accomplishment because to get to here, you're doing like a pretty obscure kind of thing.
Yeah.
Again, you had to go through this toxic swamp. Toxic is the most feared like status element of the game, other than perhaps curse. You're fighting these very tough enemies. You've earned it. Getting here, it wouldn't have been bad from a flow perspective to let you just kind of do a victory lap and unlock this shortcut to go back.
Well, because you're also getting like a really good item. Like you're getting a key that will get you more game.
Yeah, and it's sending you back into the dungeon as well, which is really cool. So you grab the key and go back into the dungeon, thinking, right, let's find the doors that it unlocks. And
I don't think it would have hurt anything just to be kind of a chill moment. There's so little of those just kind of quiet moments of walking through an area in this game.
Especially as if you haven't killed the giant and the rats, or you've reset them at the Profaned capital bonfire, you're coming out there to a hole in the wall and seeing that giant with all the rats below and thinking, right, this is my moment to take them on and find out what's down here. And, there's a big kind of a moment of steeling yourself to jump down into something that is going to be a difficult fight. And that would have been a nice build-up, as you say, just to kind of come through that door, realize where you are, and then steel yourself for another encounter. Sadly not.
Yeah. There's another way we could have went rather than going to unlock Siegbert, which is really that's kind of what you're doing here, is because that's kind of the thing that makes this boss make sense, even if I don't like it. Like it's the thing, that's the point of this boss, is to finish this NPC, really. The direct path is really short. You go down this kind of crumbling bridge where you're getting sniped by fire. There are these kind of these handmaidens who are around a kiln off in the distance that has huge range. It's kind of Lord Vessel looking, but not quite.
No.
It's not. I looked at it really close this time of playing it because some people were supposing that maybe that in the Ashes of Ariandel trailer, there's a boss that holds a kiln. It's not this one.
No.
The one that boss holds is more elaborate than this one.
Yeah, the only elaborate thing about this is that it is held up by statues of what appear to be priests or peasants, something like that.
Yeah. But the whole point is you're kind of going through this narrow bridge. You fight a gargoyle on it while getting sniped at. So kind of the trick here is just run in, get shelter.
Yeah, you when you say you fight it, you mean you run past it, right?
Yes. Yeah. You encounter it. And then you end up in this just kind of hallway, which is really just that this is the Profaned capital.
It looks neat. Like I love the detail along the floors and stuff.
Yeah, because you see tons of corpses with tons of riches that did not melt, because the Profane flame was like how we used to think of nuclear weapons, like neutron bombs that would just kill people and leave their cities for us to plunder.
Right.
And tons of handmaidens. Like a very small area where there's probably 14 or something like that between these three different encounters with them in really short space.
Yeah. A shitload of them at that far end, beyond where you where you come in. So these appear to be the jailers, right? They're kind of wearing a similar mask. They have like a similar conical kind of thing.
Princess hat.
Yeah. Kind of veiled. They're wearing like different colored clothes, but they're attacking in a different way, which just leads me to believe they probably either they like hid and then came back, or they've always been here. It's very unclear. These handmaidens, and it's strongly implied that they're the ones who ushered in the flame.
Yeah, well, there's so the way they're dressed, they're veiled and they're wearing almost white and carrying a candle, essentially, a bit like the deacons, I suppose. There's that aspect to them, and the way they move and the way they're positioned, all grouped together, either around that sort of kiln with the flame in, or at either end of this hallway, has a kind of religious or worshipping aspect to it, which makes it even stranger that this seems to have an aspect of deification or worship of perhaps the flame itself. And then you've got the church off to the other side that we've just been through, and that doesn't feel like it's set up to worship the Profaned flame or anything close to it. So you've essentially got two temple/church style areas right next to one another, which is a bit weird. Especially given they feel so different.
Both worshipping almost like different aspects of the Profaned flame, one for the flame, one for the dark.
Yes, maybe.
They definitely seem worshipy. I mean, when you say that it's strongly implied, I don't know if I would agree with that. Like, it's implied through lack of other options. You know,
Yeah,
like we know
just,
that some ladies did that, and these are the ladies that happen to be here. The only thing that's actually on them is information about them being sadists. You know, they're
Yes,
kind of
that's true.
torturers. There's
Yeah.
nothing in their item descriptions or in their clothes that say like these are the people who ushered in the flame. The only thing that talks about oracles or ladies ushering in the flame is the Eleonora.
Was the yeah.
That I could find, unless you found
Yeah.
something that I didn't.
No,
I didn't
no. I mean
see.
that's what I'm referring to, and that is, you know, it is a lack of other options. But I'm drawing a line from that, referring to this class of priests, to these priests who are here who happen to be worshiping flame.
Yeah, or an oracle, relatives of a certain oracle.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't say anything about a class of priests. Like I'm not blaming you. I'm saying that like you are doing the thing that the only thing the game allows you to do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because
Yeah.
of the way that it's kind of spelled out. Like, sure, that makes sense, but it don't like there's not. It's
There's
just
little
it's more of
evidence
like
to it, right?
yeah, there's just nothing else there for it to be.
Yeah.
You know.
No,
Like-
so the thing that struck me about them was the way they're dressed and the way they move, very slowly, very quietly. It looks like the way people behave in a church or a cathedral or in catacombs beneath thereof. You know, when you're kind of in a religious space, there's very much that aspect to the way that they are moving and behaving.
Like they're explicitly called handmaids. Like
Yes,
they're not
they are.
called
Jailer handmaids. Yeah, yeah.
priest or oracles or anything, and that would have been such an easy connection to make if
Yeah.
they were supposed to be, if they were, you know, dagger used by the oracles of the profane capital, bam, you know, like that would have done it. But they're like a handmaid is a servant, like it's not, you know,
No, that's true.
it's not a. So again, I'm not necessarily criticizing either of you for that conclusion because the game doesn't allow space for another conclusion. It's just that way that like you end up going against the text to make the text make sense in this game.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. I don't know. It's I don't necessarily know who these people are or what they're doing here.
I mean, the other weird thing is if I mean they're called in the guide at least jailer handmaids. Now possibly just jailer because they happen to look exactly like the jailers and they're clearly related to in some way, even if it's just design. But the handmaid question is, well, so a handmaid has someone to wait on, someone to tend to, and the only person, if it or the only being there would be Yorm that they could be handmaids for, which is plausible. Yorm has lost his sense of self at this point, enough that he's lost sense of what he's supposed to be doing, and maybe they are tending to him, and maybe jailer handmaids signifies that actually they're keeping him there. But again, other than the name, there's not a lot there to suggest that. They're outside of his room. It looks like he could get up and leave whenever he wanted. That's certainly implicit in the storyline that Sigurd's involved in, is that he should be leaving. He should not be there. And it's of his own volition or lack of ability to do so that he is. And the only other thing I guess they could be handmaids for is the flame.
Yeah. I mean, if it has like a servant, it's kind of a weird phrasing, but it's possible.
Yeah.
It's also the super rare drop where they drop the gargoyle polish of Nim. So I think that's probably who they're serving, is they're just polishing up those cracks. Yeah, I'm just lying. I don't know. I think that it is it's convenient in a way that doesn't sit right with me. That feels like sloppy storytelling. And especially since like the fact that they're like sadist and they enjoy, like, that doesn't feel like somebody who would bring this great power into the world. You know, the two things we know about them is that they're called they're called handmaidens, and that they have this dagger that causes bleeding for like torture reasons. And those things are related, and like, yes, both are bad. You know, the profane flame is profane and bad, and this is, but they're different. There's like scale dissonance. Like the scale of torturing somebody and making them bleed is not the same scale as creating a cataclysm
it's
that destroys a civilization.
Yeah.
You know, this is like saying the street tough is the person who actually, like, you know, sent WMDs to, you know, a country. Like, no, he just sticks you up for your lunch money.
Very, very different forms of, entirely different forms of being almost. To one doesn't beget the other in any way, shape, or form. So the other thing that's related to Sullivan in this respect is that it's said in a couple of item descriptions relating to the profane flame that those who wield the flame lose, I think it's either their heart or their soul. and that pertains to Sullivan himself wielding the sword imbued with flame. The witches that have the holy witches, is it, that have the that are in Irithyll and have the flame sort of staffs, and these handmaids also, and the gargoyles as well. Their stone hammers are imbued with the profane flame as well. So there is a sense that by wielding this to do damage to someone else, they're losing their sense of self, or they're losing themselves to the flame. So there is that kind of, that's masochistic almost.
Yeah, that might be where the sadism comes from.
But, yeah, there is that.
It just feels like an act of sorcery of creating the profane flame just seems bigger than, like, they could have been the subject of it. And again, you also could totally be right, and that's what it is too. It just, there's not enough there for me to get to that location. Like, I just don't feel like it's finished. I don't feel like that story is told, you know. Anyway, sorry to derail that. I just,
I think that just speaks to some of the frustration that I know you guys have had, having listened to previous episodes, and I've had as well. Not so much whilst I was playing the game, but certainly in the months since release.
Yeah, it's a game that is more fun to play through than to think back on.
Yeah, so with Dark Souls, it was the opposite. I played through the game and had a sense of what was going on, and the more I thought about it and sought out other information, the more it made sense and the more I could get from it. Whereas this kind of feels like when I was going through, I was getting from it the same hints and callbacks and cameo appearances of previous characters. I was getting that from it and enjoying it, because playing the game is playing the game. And technically, mechanically, I enjoyed this game incredibly. But then afterwards, the more I think about what's going on, and this area is kind of, well, all the areas are, but this area feels like a microcosm of that, where the more I try to pull at a string and think, right, what does this mean? It just comes away and there's nothing there. And so I end up trying to probably read more into, like, who the handmaids are than I should. But it feels like I have to, because there's not enough there to substantiate any reading of who they are, really.
You end up with just like a handful of strings. You know. We go over into kind of the wealth room over here, where there are chests and just tons of witches here, and a gargoyle ambush. Which is another, they're not quite as deadly as the jailers, so you don't have to, it's not quite as tedious to clear this out one by one, or to just dive in. Like, you can be more successful doing that. Yeah,
they're very slow to cast their slow-moving fireballs. The only danger here is in numbers and in crossfire, if they spread out and can kind of triangulate on you.
And the mimic.
Well, that we're going to get to that.
Mimics and gargoyle coming down behind you can be the other issue. But.
Yeah, I mean, just like these priests in a vacuum are not the problem
in of themselves.
Even with
which maybe is why they put so many in there, because it almost feels like it makes no difference whether there's 14 or 1 in there.
Yeah. And if you go through there and open up the chest or just try to make a run, you'll get punished by a mimic. One of which has a fucking rusted gold coin.
Yep, it's 2 of them too. So this can be a goddamn war zone, and you're going to either try and clear it out, or you're going to just make a run for it. Not only so usually when there are 2 chests and a mimic is involved, it's one of them and it's punishing you for not paying attention and stopping. Here, the fact that it's both of them. We haven't seen that before. Okay, it's a novel. But man, oh man, does it feel just like a kick in the balls in an uncharacteristic way.
Yeah. And you don't get rewarded for it as a double, triple kick.
I mean, that's the whole thing is a kick in the balls.
Yeah, multiple kicks, multiple legs. You can get that coin. You can get a great shield of glory, which is, like, at this point, if you're doing a great shield build, you probably already found your great shield that you want, unless you're doing this for fashion souls. Which is not a bad looking great shield.
Yeah, it looks like a fan design one, actually.
Yeah, it does. That's pretty good. Yeah.
The other thing is that Yorm's great shield is pretty nearby here, obviously, and that's a pretty darn good great shield as well. So. It's going to be for appearances, because, as you say, you're either going to already have whatever great shield you found, or you're about to get a boss soul one that is pretty darn good as well. So it feels a bit unnecessary, but
yeah,
it's better than rusted coins, I suppose.
Yeah, anything's better than rusted coins. This Grey Shield, the item description, which is kind of Teflon-y and doesn't have much to do with things, is frustrating to me because this would have been a place where they could have filled in some of these cracks. Mm-hmm. And every time I pick up a rusted coin here, it's frustrating to me because that could have been something that could have filled in a crack, you know? Like item descriptions and treasure placements are opportunities in this game. They're not random. And the fact that this needed so much more love and there were opportunities to do it is part of why that ends up being so anger-making to me. But speaking of anger-making, let's get on to this boss thing.
Yeah. Located in the center here, one of the cross hallways, there is a fog door. And so, okay, we're here. We know that Yorm sits lonely and sullen in the Profaned capital. And when we step through, if we have fulfilled all of the requirements for Sigvard's quest, we get this dramatic angle of not just you walking through, but the camera lingers and holds. And a first for this series, Sigvard is actually following you, like a step behind, and is here. And he, basically says something. I'll just cut in the dialogue here.
Yorm, old friend. I, Sigvard of the Knights of Katarina, have come to uphold my promise. Let the sun shine upon this Lord of Cinder.
And this begins the fight with Yorm the Giant.
So I had Sigurd with me on my first attempts at this, which I realise I have to now justify because it sounds so unlikely that on my first playthrough I would have actually got to the end of Sigurd's quest. But I did, simply because I wasn't I wasn't assuming that the game was going to be structured like Bloodborne, where you kind of just want to push forward. So I was frequently going back to areas just to see if there was anything else I could unlock or find or do. And Cathedral of the Deep, obviously, there's stuff like Rosaria's area that I need to go and find and do, and there was the sort of rafters up the top I hadn't been to, but I knew were there. So I was going back to that, and the fact that you pretty much always want to go back to the Cleansing Chapel bonfire meant that I came out one time having gone further past this to Irithyll, I think almost in the game, and saw the enemy wasn't there, and so was able to fulfill that part, which I guess is the main part that people lose Sigurd, is that you have to have already done the chapel, and then go back to it to find him in the well. And when you get patches into Firelink Shrine, it's going to be a bit kind of iffy as well. So I ended up having him with me just because my first playthrough took me like 80 hours or something, and I was just going back to areas repeatedly, like all the time, just to see if there was anything else there.
Yeah.
And ended up tripping over it. And that's a heck of an entrance for this fight.
Yeah.
For the first time around, it really is cool.
It is. It's like pretty neat. It's one of those things where, I will get to all of the various problems I have with Sigurd and this boss, but it is such a limp fart if you don't have Sigurd with you. Mm-hmm. Like it is.
Feels like it's made for him being there.
It's 100% made for him being there, and the fact that like it's cool that you're able to find them. And I've talked to other people who found him on their first time as well. It feels unlikely to me, to complete his quest line on your first run.
It is. Even if you know what you're doing, it still feels unlikely to actually get it to happen because you're reliant on when you unlock the tower at Firelink Shrine to get patches to come in, or when you've been through the chapel and met patches there, and in order to then be able to buy the armor to throw down, it's too many steps that feel like they are not linked, and therefore you can't be in control of when you're going to come across them or come across him.
It probably makes sense to talk about this fight in kind of like escalating levels of, or de-escalating levels of difficulty, right? Because this is kind of a different fight depending on how you come to it and what you use. And what's kind of a bummer about it is like it never at none of these levels does it get interesting to me. If you fight him just on his own terms, it is really just like a big humanoid enemy boss fight. You know, he's really big. Go ahead.
Extreme ankle resistance, though.
Yeah.
So, like, there is a different way
you're
dragon,
yes, type levels of health. You're just chipping away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you're incentivized. He can be a ranged fight. You can shoot him in the head with arrows a lot.
Yeah.
That's viable.
Yeah. But he will, just kind of like his attack. Kind of repertoire is very limited. It's mostly he's attacking with this kind of like gigantic machete kind of thing.
And he's fast as well.
Yeah, he will close distance like a beast.
Like, Old Hero is a pretty good touchstone for this fight, but that's a way different fight because there's a lot of strategy involved in being quiet, moving quietly, and not letting him know where you are. And there just isn't that here. He will turn even if you've sprinted to the other end of the arena, and he's on you before you can, even if you have Storm Ruler, charge the sword. So you'll get maybe one shot off at his head, and then he's on you, and you have to move.
Yeah,
it's
So you mentioned the Storm Ruler. If you can make a beeline for the for the throne, and in the middle of the fight, equip this sword, which good on you if you can do that. You're able to kind of use this relic from Demon Souls times in order to charge up the sword with storms, which for some reason, I guess giants are like dogs, and that storms are real bad for them. They just get real
Please
freaked
think
out.
before you use fireworks around your arm.
Right. And so you can use this, and you end up kind of doing a very similar kind of like wind slash. As you kind of charge it up, and so this it does massive damage. Like you can take them down in just a handful of these of these attacks if you can pull them off, and then the fight becomes about kind of managing the distance and hoping that you're able to charge it up and get a shot off while he's before he can get in and interrupt you.
There's some kindnesses here where your Storm Ruler will hold a charge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Once you get to the kind of break point and you have the wind will swirl around. It's visually indicated. Figuring out how to do it, realizing it's a weapon art kind of thing. Like it was a little bit tricky to me. But you can make that happen. And then, like you said, Kole, it's just about he gets increasingly aggressive. So your windows get narrower and narrower where you can actually hit him with the thing.
Yeah.
The easiest way to do it is with Sigurd, with you doing the exact same thing with another copy of the unique sword, where he it's not unique in this world, but and then it's just one of you can draw aggro while the other one kind of gets him with the Storm Ruler, and then it's beyond trivial,
right?
So it's never hard, it's never that interesting in any version of it, like I fought him alone on my first time, because I didn't do, and it's not that noteworthy, but it's also not that interesting of a challenge. It's a real gimmick boss kind of thing.
Yeah.
The challenge was realizing there was an item in the room.
I think that's the thing, because so often, like, there are bosses, why am I forgetting the name of the third boss in Bloodborne? The Poison Beast. Blood-Star Beast, thank you, yeah.
Yes.
Where you've got the antidotes behind the altar. And if you happen to go around there and see them, you might pick them up, and that's useful. But usually items in a boss room, you don't pick them up mid-fight, you just leave them for the end. Because you're focused on the boss, and especially in this case where the boss is closing you down so quickly. The only thing that gave me the opportunity to do that was Sigurd was in there with me, drawing aggro. And so I was over here thinking, well, my weapon's doing nothing. Heal up over at the throne, pick the item up, Storm Ruler, and of course immediately I knew what was going on, because Demon Souls, and that makes sense. But again, storms defeating giants.
Does it make sense, James?
Well, it's not pre-established, and okay, we've got 7 different varieties of giant at this point. It's basically Heinz baked beans. But
it's not a gigantic
It's like,
sky manta.
It doesn't apply to any of the other giants that we've seen. As far as we know, it's never been mentioned. It's never been, it's just never been relevant.
No.
And now suddenly this is lore in the way that Storm Ruler could be used to defeat, the Storm King, isn't it?
In Storm King, the Storm Ruler Storm King relationship is like holy to me.
Mm-hmm.
That is something that is so cool to be on this windswept vista.
Yeah.
As like this giant thing that is bigger than any enemy in the game is making these like off in the distance, and you find a sword like in a fucking stone, and the like this it's amazing.
This broken sword that is useless elsewhere, but ends up being the key to this kind of fight that has been unique in the series. Like that fight to me is emblematic of so many of the cool things that Demon Souls did.
Totally. And it's just like I have found a legend. I'm enacting, and that plays into the story of that place, like this culture that is based around these kind of death legends and stuff. Like I'm enacting this legend. It feels amazing in Demon Souls.
And the other thing is you need the Storm Ruler because you don't have a way to fight this thing.
Well, you can do it with arrows. Both the fights you can do with arrows.
You could, but basically, if you're used to relying on being a melee character, in theory, with this fight with Yorm, you could think that's the way you have to take him down, is just chip away at his ankles.
Right.
Like Amygdala, you can chip away at the ankles.
Absolutely.
You can kill Wolnir,
And you might think that's the way to do it, but with the Storm King, you kind of get the feeling that this isn't the right way to kill this. You feel like you're cheesing it, hiding behind the rock, popping out arrow, pop out arrow, and trying to time it. And it feels like, well, this isn't an epic boss fight. This is me, with a slingshot, trying to take, David versus Goliath type thing. And then you pick up Storm Ruler and think, I get it. Now I've got you. I know what's going on. And in this fight, it just feels like there's an extra leap in logic required there, because he is just a big giant. You've been hacking ankles of big giants before now. I'll just do the same. So it was only the fact that I had Sigurdin with me that meant that I thought, this is not right. Picked up the item, saw it was Storm Ruler, had the chance to equip it, and that made the boss fight a spectacle, at least, even if it wasn't interesting. You feel powerful. It's the spectacle of going in there with Sigurd at your side, which, let's face it, on your first playthrough is, this is Siegmeyer. I'm getting to do this with that guy, And so there's that notion to it. And for me, it overcame the fact that, there's no interesting way to do this boss fight. It's just spectacular enough to kind of get by. But
it is really empowering to destroy him with magic. I get that part of it. It's hard. This thing, and this plays into Secret too. And I promise, Kole, I'll let you talk. I apologize for taking so much of this. I'm sorry. It is. I've been in many ways. This season has been leading up to this moment for me.
No, I'm just letting you talk.
So it's impossible for me not to consider this character and this boss and this section not in contrast with the things that came before, which isn't me being unfair. It's Dark Souls 3 setting them up as echoes. And the fact, like, I had this holy sword, I had this mountain experience, this thing, with the Storm King. Here it's on the ground. It's reappearing again. It's not a unique thing to this culture. It's not a unique weapon. And there's two of them. Like, that is so shitty and just doesn't feel cool to me. Like,
but one goes to the doubter and one goes to the loyal friend. I'm not actually defending it. I'm just...
Yeah, they say it's the same thing with it's similar to the Logan thing, where, like, you can just say, like, you can have an item description that says, no, this happens all the time. Like, this is everywhere. But just having a description that says that it happens doesn't mean it was a good choice to actually do it. So it took this thing that was very empowering made me feel like I was the hero of an epic legend. And now they're just everywhere. Like, two unique swords. You don't, like, go roll up with two Excaliburs unless you're doing the item dupe glitch so Edge can have things to throw. It's for the most part, you don't, like, there shouldn't be two Excaliburs. There shouldn't be two, Muramasas. Like, these are...
Yeah,
that just is fundamental
to
me as an idea.
It could have been something new that achieved a very similar effect, but didn't actually strictly evoke the exact same thing that was that we are coming to it.
I care about.
That we're bringing to it.
Yeah, that you the company FromSoft did a lot of work to make me care about. And succeeded. And now, again, in that way, that Dark Souls 3 is just kind of fuck you, like, people who care about this stuff in some ways, like. I cared about that, and now it's shitty. Not to mention the fact that like it's internally inconsistent, where it's not a sword that is good against giants.
No,
it's a sword that's good against Yorm. What would it have hurt? Like, would it have been anything like a bad Easter egg to make this work on other giants and do the same thing? Then at the very least, it's internally consistent. Instead, it doesn't. Within the physics or the magic of the game, it's inconsistent because it only works on Yorm. It says it works on giants. It doesn't do anything. That's really frustrating, to me as well. And that's without even getting into Sigurd, which is like a whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's anticlimactic is one of my biggest problems with this. I have no problem with an easy fight, but just I don't know, like he's one of the Lords of Cinder.
Yeah, he's one of the 4 guys.
And if you're going to do that, like a great thing to do with a fight that they're trying to load with as much significance as this, and also that is kind of like as mechanically, I don't know, cheesy as this one is, or let's just say corny. Whichever food you want to ascribe a negative connotation to. You know what what pairs really well with that? Pathos.
Yeah.
I'm not asking for everything like this to be Estrella, but it's really, really hard to care, and it feels like they are just kind of festooning this half-developed thing with totems of talisman saying like, hey, maybe, just maybe, your care for this thing that we've associated with this will kind of carry it through with dealing with the lack of anything new that any work that we could have done. I was trying to avoid saying they didn't work very hard at this, but that ultimately is where it comes down for me, I guess.
It is. I mean, I think that people who I have a publicly different opinion about Sigurd than a lot of people, but I think that one thing that feels very evident to me, and you can still disagree with it, but something I feel very sure of is that like the way that this is trying to evoke those emotions and borrow that feeling from those old games is very intentional. So when I complain about Sigurd, sometimes people will be like, oh, he's just another guy from Katarina, you shouldn't compare him to Sigmar at all. I don't buy that at all.
Come on, that's like the same voice actor, the same mannerisms,
exactly,
the same bumbling nature, and he's a bit more of a badass, but it's
willfully obtuse to me to say that they're not trying to draw these comparisons and not trying to evoke that feeling in me, and it's such a fumble at doing that.
We'll get you a new cat who looks exactly like the old cat. Don't worry, he'll have all the same spots.
The first time you meet him, he literally appears from the ground like magic in front of your eyes.
Lit
he
like
says
God.
the same thing too. He says like, I've been in quite a pickle. Yeah, it is.
They know exactly what that is. Yeah, definitely.
They want me to compare him to Siegmeyer, and he comes up really wanting in real fundamental ways to me.
I'm not a big fan at all of backseat game design. I just want to ask in particular, so instead of this being a kind of like thread the needle type NPC plot where you're kind of having to jump through so many hoops out of order, kind of, your chances are most people are not going to stumble upon this without reading through a guide on their second or third playthrough, and get him into that arena, which is at least seemingly the way that fight is supposed to happen. Thematically and mechanically, it makes sense that Sigurd's in there next to you. And for me, the spectacle of that worked. Do you think it would have been too cheap, or do you think it might have been a good idea to make his quest far more it's going to happen? You meet him at several points during the game. In order to progress, you have to help him. His is going to be the one NPC quest you cannot fail, and he is going to be walking into this room next to you, and then don't have two Storm Rulers. He is able to fight Yorm. You are not without Storm Ruler, so he distracts Yorm while you almost like Archdragon Peak, like the sort of gimmick fight there, where you're going around the entire arena while this dragon's in the middle. So have Sigurd and Yorm fighting in the middle, and you have to make your way, even with him shouting hints if needs be. And I know that's way too leading the horse by the nose type thing, but they could have made a spectacle of that potentially done something different with his NPC quest, and made the fight more about you getting this sword and taking down Yorm, whilst he helped his friend, if you like.
Yeah.
Or they could have even gone the other way and made it about Sigurd taking down Yorm. You know, because Henri is about taking down Sullivan, and that would have been kind of an interesting. It would have been a little bit player disempowering. But if he came in with the Storm Ruler and you were just there to run distraction for him, like you can't fail the quest. It's a little bit. It would be easier. But what we have now instead is that for a lot of players, because the quest line is so fiddly, Sigurd's not going to make sense. Yeah. Sigurd's just going to disappear off the map. So all of that time, or if you were interested in that storyline, it was wasted. And Yorm isn't going to make sense because the fight doesn't have any of that sense of pathos. We have like 4 lines that say he was kind of lonely and people made fun of him, which like, you know, I feel sympathy for people who are lonely nerds. But there's not the weight that we have with any other of the Lord of Cinders without this cutscene kind of propping it up.
Yeah, they put the maximum punch behind the thing that is least likely to happen. And when you have this thing that is supposed to be a tentpole encounter in your game, you know, I think that you should at least design it so that, and you know, we Monday morning quarterback all the time, but I feel kind of bad saying this, but like it, you know, they should at least design it so that it's not an inevitability, but you would have to actively fuck it up as opposed to just breathe, you know, and breathe the wrong way in the wrong direction, and then all of a sudden, you know, you're getting a diminished experience out of this. And you know, the first time I did this, I just got the Storm Ruler and I beat him in one go. It was fine. Like, not having Sigurd there doesn't make this impossible. I don't want it to come across like we're saying that.
It doesn't make it hard. It makes it meaningless.
Right.
Like it doesn't have any of that sense of like pathos, and you don't know the full story.
Right.
Like, if Yorm is a good story, you need Sigurd there. Like I'm not totally
the one
convinced he's a
thing
good
this
story.
fight has going for it, basically, is what we're kind of saying, isn't it?
Exactly. That is the thing that's noteworthy. So it doesn't make it too hard. It just makes it not cool enough. You know, especially on the heels of Aldia, like, which is the order I did this in, and that is such a letdown. Like
Aldrich.
Yeah, thank you, Aldrich. Is this a good time for my tight 2 on Sigurd, or do we have more Yorm things to say?
There's nothing to say about Yorm. I think we've hit it. Like you charge up the Storm Ruler and win.
So as the climax to Sigurd's story, right? Like we get Sigurd, and I talked about this way back in Undead Settlement when we run into him. At first, it seems like Sigurd is going to be a subversion of Siegmeyer, because he helps you with the demon, and it's like very clearly very similar to the Chaos Eaters in Izalith. Somewhere along the line, that stopped being the case, and you just he just becomes Siegmeyer too. You know, he just keeps getting into trouble. You keep helping him out.
Stuck down a well, stuck in a cell.
Wells and cells.
Yeah,
for miles and miles.
Gets caught in a really bad relationship with Chell from Portal.
Yeah, exactly. Wells, Chells.
Can't identify a weird smell.
All those pickles are just back and forth, and he's very likable. But when you get to the end of his storyline, this is the climax of his story. And we can talk about what the actual dialogue here happens, where after you beat him with Siegmeyer or Sigurd, he says, like, now for a final toast to your valor and my old friend, may the sun shine. Long may the sun shine. Now I'm going to take a little nap. The only thing to do after a toast. You're a true friend. He's very nice to you. Best of luck. And then he either dies as you walk up, if this is not your last Lord of Cinder, his purpose fulfilled, or you get teleported away, which, like, that's a whole other thing. And then you come back and his armor is there, so maybe he didn't die. There's no body. People in the community are saying, like, no, he's still alive. You know, he's still good. It's still good. Regardless of which, I don't care. And the reason I don't care whether he dies is because there is, compared to Dark Souls 1 NPCs, Dark Souls 3 NPCs aren't about things in the way that I want them to be. Where I associate the series of having NPCs that have a very strong thesis behind them that reveal a human truth. We teased Naked Logan a lot. Logan is about the pursuit of knowledge and the you're better off not knowing. Like that's a universal truth that is true in my life. And there's a character in this video game that's about. And my favorite NPC in this entire series by a country mile is Siegmeyer, because the profundity about what he's about is really something I don't see addressed very often, which is that people need a purpose, and robbing them of their purpose is an act of violence as harsh as any other. So the that whole time you're doing this weird stuff, it's just it's very fiddly, but like if you just keep solving this guy's problem for him, it's not about tough love, it's not that he won't learn, it's that he doesn't have a reason to be. He identifies himself as a hero, you're robbing his identity from him. That's great.
Yeah,
like that is so good. I don't remember what I said during the season. It's possible my appreciation has grown more for this character, but I love that.
Yeah,
the point of Sigurd, friendship is nice, honor is good. Like the point of him is he's killing his
keep your
friend.
promises, kid. It's like Mr.
It's
T.
a golden book.
Yeah,
it's gone from this thing that is a theme that's very resonant in my life and feels adult and sophisticated and like literary to something that is literally like a fable that is just something you tell a kid, like it's like something Barney would say. And I don't mean that.
Sorry, go on.
No, I just and that's where it loses me. It's like it just adds up to him being a good guy, and like that's great. Good guys are good, but I expect more from this series and this writing than that.
I think what I was about to say when I rudely interrupted, apologies, was it would have been like if Siegmeyer's quest was just reuniting him with Sieglind.
Yeah,
those characters, getting them back together would have been great. That would have been fine. Yeah, he's a bumbling idiot. She's actually way more capable and is looking after him. And that would have still been a nice story. Yeah. But there's no resonance there. The resonance in that story for me is walking down onto the beach on Ash Lake and seeing him dead. Like it's at her feet, but essentially in my mind, it's in her arms.
Yeah.
And she actually resigned to the fact that this is probably the best thing for him. And you realizing you did this to him. You did this to them. She may accept it, but that's you did that. You didn't know you were doing it necessarily, but you took away his agency. You took away his raison d'etre, however you want to put it. Whereas with this one, you get the spectacle of him helping his friend, but actually, what's it saying about that?
It's empty. It's really
be
empty.
A loyal friend. Well, okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Goodness is good. Slavery is wrong. World hunger is bad. And there are, so this is something that like has always stuck in my craw. I wrote a really long thing about it and I'll put in the show notes. And Sean Wagner, who's in our last episode, really loves Sigurd and wrote a really good defense of this, a really good kind of take on it. So we disagree with it. And like, this is by no means is it like I know a lot of people have come to a conclusion that this is good. But it's not, that simplicity of this really hurts it for me in a series that I consider to be smarter than that.
I think if it's going to be that simple, it has to be done perfectly, doesn't it? It has to be absolutely, like, you have to be able to see it through without feeling frustrated. You have to feel it was worth it to get him to the boss fight and see the end of it, and you have to feel it was absolutely pitch perfect.
He's the NPC equivalent of a mimic with a rusted coin in it. Like it's a lot of effort for not adding up to very much.
I think that simplicity can be good, depending on the context. Another word for that, it would be direct, right? Like you want this to, if it's going to be simple, it needs to take a direct line to whatever they're trying to evoke, right? This entire thing, and I don't feel as strongly about this as you do, Gary, but I think that it reflects very poorly on Dark Souls 3 NPCs as a whole. It feels kind of like everybody's going through the motions, or it feels like this entire thing is just kind of marking time. Like we need something to fill this world, and might as well have Siegmeyer here. And I can hear a voice, or I can hear kind of a rebuttal to this to say, hey, take Dark Souls 3 on its own terms. People sometimes brace against when we, basically hold previous games against this one. I think that it's a comparison that From is actively inviting. It's the premise of it here. I'm going to be a caricature of myself and then go back to Dark Souls 2. Dark Souls 2, didn't have any of the grand overarching quests really, in as satisfying a way as the first one did. But for as much as each individual person in Dark Souls 1 kind of had their own individual story, Dark Souls 2 had this incredibly resonant theme about people losing their identity and purpose. Everybody was a Siegmeyer. It was like distributed. To a large degree across this as the process of hollowing kind of changed. And so even though those quests were mechanically unsatisfying, you never got like this, like no NPC defined a boss fight like this one does right here. Now we've done kind of a 180 around it. I wouldn't call this mechanically satisfying, but like you have to look at did they achieve what they set out to do? And then also you have to ask the question, was what they set out to do enough? Like, was it worth doing? And just, it really does. It just comes back as a whiff, So if this is simple and direct, it doesn't drive fast enough or hard enough to actually punch with as much force as I think a lot of people are ascribing to it. Again, let's, layer this with totems of things that you remember and hope that you care.
Yeah. Yeah,
so
it is... Or go ahead, James. I apologize.
I was just going to say the wonderful Mike Villalobos, previous guest. I've watched several of his streams where he just says, "Look, I'm not comparing these games. I'm going to take this game on its own terms. I don't want," because he knows a Twitch chat is going to inevitably get into just shouting at one another. Essentially, it's just going to get into shouting opinions at one another, and that's not really a conversation. What does it matter? Take the and he's not being dictatorial about that. He just doesn't find that interesting. But I think you're absolutely right, Kole. Yes, you could say don't make the comparisons. The game makes the comparisons. The game is made to make comparisons by retreading all of this stuff. And that may be a theme of the game. It may be a theme of the series. But it wasn't unknowing that they put in a Siegmeyer cipher into this game. It wasn't unknowing that they recreated certain areas and certain boss fights and events from previous games.
Yeah, if you're gonna have it, use it, and they did.
Yeah. And if you're gonna do that, if you're going to show me something that I've seen before, you have to comment on the original in an interesting way.
Yeah.
Or subvert it or take it in a new direction. That is, it doesn't have to be better necessarily, but it has to be interesting. Equally interesting. I would have accepted.
Especially
as a
when
way
the original was already a subversion.
Yeah.
The original
Absolutely.
was already a subversion of an NPC quest.
Yeah.
It is much to make a player actually feel guilt for doing something that they think when they're doing something right. Me thinking, a lifetime of video games taught me that I should help Siegmeyer when he's in trouble.
Yeah. Action is better than inaction.
And you would get a reward from that. Is the other thing it taught
every
you.
other video game. Yeah. And then to have a video game say actually, you know what? Life is more complicated and messy than that. Have you considered this? And then making me feel guilty for doing something that is within the verb set of video games so elementally is really awesome. That is like a feat, awesome in the definition of the word, like awe-inspiring.
Yeah.
And then just to be like, you know what? You can jump through a lot of hoops. And if you jump through a lot of hoops, you get this very nice cutscene where a character that you like gets to have like a kind of a bittersweet ending, but gets to accomplish his mission. Yeah. It's really it's very pedestrian for this company to do that. And it's not like, in looking at all of the NPCs, like I don't think any of the NPCs are particularly great in this game. They all have a problem that either is similar where I don't feel like they don't add up to very much, or they are retreading ground from previous NPCs, even kind of in their theming. So it is something that I love about these games that's just gone. It reminds me a little bit of, and this is not, it's a worse problem here than it was in Bloodborne, but like the way Bloodborne handled equipment, and there wasn't as much room for that kind of archaeology through equipment and storytelling through items as was in previous games, was something I really love that was just gone. I'm poking every nook of this and I'm finding, runes I'm never going to equip if I'm lucky, as opposed to being able to tell a story through the environment, through finding things, which is a big thing in 1 and 2, that's just not really in Bloodborne as much.
Right.
To take something I love of the game and strip it out is a real bummer.
Yeah. It's just disappointing, I think, is the overall thing I've had to bring it down. Like, just again, if you're gonna bring it, use it. And
you can't be disappointed in something without loving it. Yeah. Like this doesn't come from a place of like hating these games. It comes from like expecting really great things from them because I love them. It's not I'm not being violent to this thing you like. I like it too.
No, I mean, we have everything to gain from continuing to play and talk about this thing that, we have this kind of fraught relationship with.
Has only helped us.
Yep.
That's sarcasm.
Yeah.
It is, it is not. There are plenty of people. I don't doubt in my mind that we would have more listeners if we were more effusive about it. But that's gross. It's gross to be dishonest. It's a sin to tell a lie.
Yeah.
Do we have any kind of wrap-up thoughts? Or go ahead, James.
The one quick thing I wanted to say, which I guess is another kind of sad near miss. So Yorm is essentially the king under the mountain. To go straight to a very well-worn kind of character trope, especially for anyone who's watched The Hobbit, in terms of he's the king who tried to do the right thing by his people. It backfired, and he has lost who he is. So he's now just sat down there, this kind of tormented soul who in theory, or at one time, knew what the right thing to do was, and has just drifted so far away from that. And so, in theory, the end of Sigurd's quest should be restoring that. And so it's almost not bittersweet. It's almost just a sweet ending to the quest, which again kind of makes it a very straightforward way to do it. But the problem is, Yorm is lonely. That's literally, you said it. That's what we get about him. He's lonely and he's solitary, sat on a throne, not doing the thing he knows he should be doing. There's not much more to his character. You don't really understand why that's the case, or so you don't get the kind of necessarily get the punch the air moment when Sigurd walks in there and kind of fulfills the promise he made. It is just weird. It seems like there's thematically and in terms of the word you use, pathos, so much more to be garnered from that relationship between those two characters that we just didn't get, even if you do fulfill the quest, which isn't a guaranteed at all. It's a shame.
I mean, and I can bring a lot to this. Like, I can look at that and, impose my own depression onto it and say, like,
fill in the blanks. Yeah.
Just say, like, no, I totally get it, Yorm. Like, shit went really bad, and you know what you have to do, but it's terrible, so it's better just to sit and sulk because, just any action is going to be more painful than just, sitting there in your own shit.
Here's the thing. Like, I don't want to necessarily pop that bubble, but something that muddies that up is that Yorm is probably abyss touched.
Yeah.
Well, so it's not even his reluctance, because he doesn't recognize Sigurd. He doesn't say anything. Yeah. He's got the red eyes. Like, he's probably just sick. And
again, because there's so little text here, maybe he became abyss touch because he gave over to despair. That is his version of hollowing as this Lord of Cinder is, kind of like giving over to almost this, this sloth and indolence, that will that evil will prey on, right?
Yeah.
Again, because there's no text here, I can read as much of that into it, and I can make it into a nice little medium think piece, Yeah.
Yeah. Like, there is a way, and I keep saying, I won't keep saying it forever, but like, that is a lot of the kind of lore diving that I've seen does have, more suppositions than I'm comfortable with, and my favorite loresters that have come through during Dark Souls 3 and during this kind of period in our lives have been the people who either, don't say anything that isn't really supported, who kind of do like really good kind of takes on things like that, or who just ask a lot of questions. Like kind of like learning what the questions are based on this is really pretty good. And like I said, my favorite are the people, and this has always been the case, have been the people who are like, I don't have anything to support this. This is just an idea. Maybe it's this,
Yeah.
So, it's real, the profoundly disappointing capital. But it kind of sucks because the Irithyll dungeon I like a lot as like a haunted house ride. But yeah, the Profaned capital I think is pretty bad and this climax. And I'm really looking forward to next week where I get to read 1,000 people saying that they love Sigurd and they cried. And then I get to just sit there and be the monster who, I'm not gonna be a monster about it. But
no, you just think that they're terrible for liking a bad thing.
Exactly. Like I don't think it's not a monster. It's like a god. Like it is. No, I don't think that at all. It's just I recognize that this is not everybody's kind of take on this, but I had an emotional reaction to it.
Yep.
How dare you?
Yes. Yeah. So James, thank you so much for joining us. I really do appreciate it. This has been really fun.
Yeah.
It's kind of fitting in a way. I've probably sounded more. I'm sure we've all sounded more negative than some people would have liked, but it's kind of fitting. This does feel like a little bit of a microcosm of how I've reacted to Dark Souls 3 as a whole in the kind of 7 months now, nearly 6 months since it was released. So so it's nice in a way. It is entirely suitable that I was on for this episode. So yeah,
got to do kind of
thank
a wrap
you very
up.
much for having me on.
Of course,
it's been really cool.
Where can people find you online?
The easiest thing is to grab me on Twitter at Carter, J. Just spell it all out. You'll get there. But you'll find me on podcast form and in written form, occasional videos, I suppose, as well on caneandrinse.com. Do go and check that out. Thank you very much, guys, for the hearty recommendations. It's fantastic to know that we are appreciated in kind of similar circles.
Yeah.
But you can also find me, because it will be live by the time this podcast goes out. I've launched a website and small personal podcast project called Retrofit, which is a fitness podcast, because I am not and I should be more. So I'm kind of interviewing and talking to people and guests and kind of charting a bit of a course to be a bit healthier and fitter.
That's awesome.
So yeah, you can find that retrofitpod.net, and it's at retrofitpod on Twitter as well.
Awesome.
Fantastic. So yeah, thank you, James.
Yeah, it was a good time. Everybody go check out Kane and Rinse.
Yeah, it is very good, and what a nice dude. I like him a lot.
Yeah. So if we didn't scare you off, there's some stuff you can do.
Yes. If you like the show, or if you want to, you can rate and review it on iTunes. If you want to send in well-reasoned and civil responses to that, you can do so at duckfeed.tv/contact.
Yeah.
Especially about the next area we are covering, which is Lothric Castle.
No, it's actually going to be the Consume King's Garden.
Yep. Sorry.
Consume King's Garden and the Untended Graves.
Untended. Yeah. So let's we'll do that. So we're gonna be doing that. I'm not sure exactly who we're gonna be joined by just yet.
Yep.
But we're working on it.
You can do that at duckfeed.tv/contact.
Yes. You can also support us at Patreon at patreon.com/duckfeed.tv. Just to really quickly announce it, because a couple of people have asked, more details have come out about what From's working on next, one of which is a spiritual successor to Dark Souls. So all that talk of not getting a Bloodborne 2, it feels like we're getting something like that.
Yep.
We had talked a little bit about, on mic and off, about what might happen to the show if this actually is the end. It seems like it's not, so we do not have to worry about that for now.
This dance doesn't end.
Yes. This train keeps running. And for those of you who are just like, who feel like this season of Bonfireside Chat is the Dark Souls 3 of Bonfireside Chat, where you're just crying, just ended already. I am so excited to see them go in like a new direction and do a new thing. Even if it is like, one of the things people think it's going to be like Armored Core with Souls mechanics.
Yeah, or Armored Kole. Yeah.
Armored
Kole with Swords mechanics. Just weeping.
It is. We've been recording for a while, and also it's really easy if you don't wear that under jerkin to get Swords mechanics and you're under your Armored Kole. But even if it's that, which is, I'm not super into robots, even if it's that, I am super excited to see this mechanic in a new kind of setting. I'm pretty psyched, honestly.
Yeah.
So
more details, I assume. Like, I guess this is something we're going to see at E3 next year. Like, we have a lot of empty time, I guess. I don't know what the schedule is for that.
We have zero empty time between all the because 1,000 indie Souls likes came out.
Yeah.
So
that's
like
that's gonna cover less time than we think. I think.
You think so?
Yeah.
I can think of. I mean, depending on what we want to do, and I'm not saying we have to do all of those, but I can think of like 6 or 7, like that will, and several of them would take, like, we can't do Salt and Sanctuary in an episode.
No.
There are like too many bosses, so that'll be 3 episodes.
What is this? An interface for ants? We've been recording for so long.
Yeah, so it is, there'll be things to do.
Yeah.
I think. And if not, we'll figure something out. There's always Kingsfield 2. Which is a real sigh for a game that's pretty good.
No, I laughed. It was
okay.
Yeah.
There's lots of stuff we can do. Yeah, Metal Wolf Chaos, man. Especially if they're going into Armored Core Souls.
Yeah, man. Fuck. Figuring out a way to play Metal Wolf Chaos.
It just emulates. Like, you just patch it.
Does it really?
It's a PS2 emulator, yeah.
No, I thought it was Xbox. It was mine.
I think there's a PS2 version of it.
Oh shit.
Yeah. So yeah, it's definitely playable online. Like, people have played it.
Oh, well, I'm down. I'm down to clown.
Yeah, that sounds great to me. Yeah. So anywho, if you like this, you want to see the series continue, you want to see what happens with the next, how our take on that, you want to see us dredge up Souls likes and old From games and stuff to talk about, Patreon is the best way to support us. Patreon.com/Duckfeed.tv.
Yeah. Couple of things here. We're going to be in Portland. We mentioned this a couple times over the Portland Retro Games Expo, doing a live watch out for fireballs. But we're going to be there along with a bunch of other network people. That is October the 21st, 22nd, and 23rd, I believe, in Portland, Oregon.
Yes.
Yep. Additionally, we have a PO box. If anybody's curious about that, you want to send us postcards from your travels. If you've gone anywhere over the summer, that is PO Box 27105, Cincinnati, Ohio 45227. Just address it to either Kole or to Duckfeed.tv. And it should work.
This is so we're getting so many envelopes full of pubic hairs that we are getting sick of them just coming directly to our house, because it created a lot of questions with our wives and families. So we had to get the PO box.
Yeah.
I think that's probably about all we got going on. We still have some recording. We're going to read your responses here. So we'll see you guys in a week. What should they do until next time, Kole?
Well, remember that today's lost are tomorrow's conquerors.
That is true.
Yeah.
And we all pray that we will have far more soon.
It sounded like you were going to say, it sounded like you said, today's lost are tomorrow's conquers. And that is a fur day too far. Like I can handle that.
A fur day too far sounds like a conquer version of falling down.
Just because we had James on doesn't mean we had to start getting into rare platformers, okay?
I'm getting mush mouthed.
All right. No, me too. Let's do it.
Let's go.